believe we're about live here, and it's just setting up. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone can see out. Feel free to comment and let us know that you can see us. We're having some technical difficulties. I believe I'm just going to check the streams to make sure everything's going, but feel free. It looks like it's at least going. So feel free to talk. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself while I'm looking this up?
Yes. Well, I joined the Navy in '99, and I did 5 years of battalion, NMCB 7, Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 7, out of Gulfport, Mississippi. And then after that, I re-enlisted, and I went to St. Maughan in 2004. It was spring. Um, yeah, so I went to the command of my first Monday there. I would say somebody came into the garage because I worked in the garage, and this was an underground base. It was JMF St. Maughan. It stood for Joint Maritime Force, Royal Air Force. So the Joint Maritime Force was the U.S. Navy, and the Royal Air Force was the Royal Air Force. But yeah, like on Monday, one of the guys came in and said you have to escort some civilian workers from the corporation Siemens into the underground base. And I had never been in the underground base before, and I said, all right. And I walked out and I went to the quarter deck, which is right next to the entrance, one of the entrances of the underground base. And these, civilian workers from the corporation Siemens were there waiting for me. And we went through the sliding glass door, and then there was like something that looked like a metal detector, like you'd see at an airport. And it had like rectangular sides, a top, a little ramp you'd had to step over with like the black and yellow caution tape over the ramp. And the first guy said, I'm not walking through that bloody thing. And he walked around it. And the other two followed him. They just walked around it. So I thought I didn't want to walk around it either. So I tried to walk around it, and there was a guard behind a table. And he said, no, you walk through. So I looked at it, and I just thought it was a metal detector. And I walked through. I watched them fix a pump. And then that was it. And then we went out of the underground base, and that was it. And then I had on Friday, I had a 0 to 4 a.m. watch on a Friday. And I was like, rover watch is what I was, which is like the guy who walks around base and makes sure, nobody's fighting and there's nothing going on the base, things like that. Nothing bad's happening. And there was a first class petty officer of the watch, and he was this blonde guy. He was a little overweight. He had a blonde mustache, and he pointed at the computer monitor and he said, "What do you think about that?" And I looked at it, and it looked like a black and white picture of like your stereotypical gray. And I said, "What did you get that off the internet?" And he said, "No, look." And next to that sliding glass door, there was like this really big window, like 6 inches from it stopped about 6 inches from the ceiling and 6 inches from the floor. It was like a very big window. And it had like an office room behind it, like a table and some chairs. But it was always empty whenever I saw it. But this time it had like that little gray behind it. And he was kind of like a khaki brown. And he had like a fold of skin from his tear ducts down to his cheekbones. He had the big black eyes. And the petty officer of the watch said, "Do you mind if it comes in here?" And I said, "Does it mind if I look at it?" Because I didn't know if it was like an animal or anything. If I stared at it too long, would it attack me? I didn't. I was pretty freaked out. And he said, "No, it doesn't mind." And it walked through, and that same guard was right behind him. And it had like a pistol in his hand. It looked like a silver pistol, like a polished metal pistol. And I said, "Gun, gun." I just got back from Iraq and everything like that. I was in Iraq when I was in battalion. And I stood up and I pointed at him and I said, "Gun." And it said like in my head, like I heard it in my head, like they say, it's almost like the voice in your head. It's not a gun, and it hold its hand out to let me see it. And that same guard, he was like an Englishman with like a green beret, like English Army. He had his weapon at the ready, which means he had it off his shoulder. He was holding it, but he wasn't pointing it at me, but he had it like at the ready, is what they call it. So I realized like the weapon wasn't for it; it was for me. So I just sat down. And I didn't know if it was like a syringe or something or what. It was going to like inject me with something. I didn't know what was happening. And on the floor in front of me, there was like this old junky government issued Dell computer just sitting on the floor. And it was actually,
Feel
oh,
free to start recording. I forgot.
okay. Yeah.
Just if things all mess up, but it's good. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it was actually a drill, this little silver pistol, and it took it apart like very quickly. Like it didn't have to guide the bit in or anything. It just kind of like one after another hit every screw, and it was catching the screws with the other hand as they were falling down. Slid the top off. It took out 2 gigs of RAM. Reached up because it was short. Grabbed 2 more gigs on top of the table. Put it in. Slid the top back down, and it kind of flicked its wrist and was able to set the screw in between its fingers every time. And it put it back together almost as quickly as it took it apart. 7 neighborable. And it just turned around and looked at me and just like stood there. And I kind of I looked this way and it turned its head for me. And I looked the other way and it turned its head. I looked at its hands and it moved its hands back and forth. Its hands were very long, like its fingers were very long, long, spindly. Kind of had to hold its hands in like C shapes or it would have drug its hands on its fingertips on the ground when it walked around. And I just got kind of bored with it. And I looked at the petty officer of the watch, and then they both they call it a drone, whatever these little grays are. They're like a light khaki brown. They in the military they call them drones. And it walked back into the underground base, and that same first class petty officer said, "What did you think about that?" And I said it was pretty weird. He said, Do you think you could work around something like that?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't see why not." And I was kind of pinching my leg the whole time. I was sitting down and I was as hard as I could with my thumb and my index finger. I was pinching my thigh. And he said, "Do you think you're dreaming?" And I said, "No, I want to be able to remember this in case you wipe my mind. Like I want to have a mark." Yeah, like I was like giving myself a blood blister. I was like pinching myself as hard as I could to give myself a mark. And he said, "No, you'll remember this. Don't worry." He said, "But at least for now." It's kind of like how he said it.
That's good that you know that. Like, when did you realize that technique? Because not a lot of people know about that, and to where they would even have a situation there they would need to remember. But yeah, there's some shows that talk about it that like I learned at an early age. So I wake up with like big fucking scratch marks on my arm, and then like, what the hell caused that? It's like, and I tune into it. It's like, oh, myself. Okay.
Yeah, well, it was just kind of desperation because it was just such a, I don't know, uncommon thing to happen. I guess so. It was just something that came to me like, oh, they're gonna wipe my mind after this. I know that, because I watched Men in Black and everything like that. I was running kind of like movies through my head, like every sci-fi movie I knew, I was running it through my head that, try to figure this out. And that's pretty much what it was. It was just, I was just trying to give myself a mark because I pretty much thought they're gonna wipe my mind after seeing something like this. And he said we're not gonna do it yet. We're not gonna wipe your mind yet. And
Yeah.
yeah. And he said, "You're smart." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, like really smart." And he goes, "Look at this." And he pointed at the computer monitor and there were like these color coded lines that kind of went back and forth, like up and down. And there was one right above mine, and then there was me right below it. And he said, "See, you're the second smartest guy on base." And I said, what is that, like 140, 150 IQ? And he said, "More like 190, 195. And then there was like a gap, and then there were the other guys. There was like a bunch of like a clump of different color squiggly lines. And he said, well, he said you drink, but you don't have any clots. And no, he said you smoke, but you don't have any clots. That's because you drink. Because I drank and I smoke a lot at the time. And I said, "How do you know that?" And he said that same machine. And he said that metal detector. He said it's a scanner. He says it can find out your IQ. It gives you like a complete scan of your entire body, whether you have clots, whether you do drugs, whether you drink, whether you smoke, all this stuff. It just knew everything just from walking through it from a split second.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. And he started asking me things like, "Do you have any hobbies?" And I said, "I used to play classical guitar." And he said, "Well, they'll like that." And then I said, "Well, who are you talking about? Who?" And he said, "Well, there's Germans up there." I said, "Up where? In space?" He goes, "Yeah, in the moon and beyond." He really didn't call it space. He just kind of said up there. And I said, like, Germans from, Germany? And he said, like, well, they're mostly from like the 30s and 40s, but there are some from today. But he was just telling me things. And he said there's others too. And I said, "What are they?" As far as what I just saw. He said, "We don't know. All that we know is they've been here as long as us." And then I was told he didn't know what he was talking about, but he kind of went on about something like there was a war and we had outside help, and one of the agreements, they lost the war and we participated in this war a long time ago. And one of the agreements is they had to live underground, and they've been infiltrating like our school systems and our religions and politics and things like that for a long time, for hundreds, thousands of years, even maybe.
Would
And
that be like a particular race that's underground or a bunch of the races?
well, he did not like go into he. I don't think he wanted to tell me a lot right at the time, but it seemed like this base was mostly working with like reptiles and
Mm.
the drones and the grays and things like that. They didn't seem to be working with like other, ETs that you're elongated skulls, reptiles, and grays. Those were like
Not
the
a lot of people talk about that as like the reason. I mean, there's strategic reasons for going underground, but like there's not a lot of big information on why we have the surface and others like separate. And so there's like, oh yeah, that makes sense with there being a war and enforcement of it. So that's cool.
Yeah, he said they used to walk on the earth with us at one time and we worshiped them like gods. And then then there was like a war, we got outside help. And yeah, that's the reason why they had to live underground after that. And so, I mean, I kind of was, you know, we should tell everybody about this. This is crazy. Like, I didn't think things like this existed. Like, how can you just be so calm? I was running my fingers through my hair. I think my hair was kind of falling out, because when you go into shock, your hair starts to like fall out. And he's like, you need to calm down. He's like, you need to go for a walk. And he just told me to go for a walk. I remember looking up at the stars, and I was way out in the country, so I could see like the Milky Way belt. I was out in the countryside of England, and I just kind of looked at it differently. Even that moment, it was very strange. And yeah, he was telling me I could become a pilot. He said you'll become an officer with your scores, so you'll have plenty of time to practice guitar and things like that. And I like that. So it went on to oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to tell you. Before this, I saw Michael Aquino. It was just something I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I saw that. He's a colonel in the army. He started like the Church of the Temple of Set. He's got like the eyebrows.
Yep, yep.
They look like horns. I recognized him because I
Uses
saw him on
kids.
Oprah when I was a kid.
Mm.
But yeah, I saw him at the quarterdeck like a little bit before this, like a couple of days before. But it was like I had a 0-100 to 4 a.m. on a Friday. I saw Kino. It was the week before. That's what it was. Then I did this the next week where I saw the drone. And it was just I just said hi to him, and he was looking through papers on the quarterdeck. And I think it was because of my scores or whatever. He wanted to see me in person, kind of thing. I think that's kind of like what it was. And he was just in his uniform, and I didn't really think anything of it. But yeah, then this happened, and so it was the following Monday after I saw the drone and everything. Guys came up to me and they were saying, what do you think? What did you think? And I actually forgot. It was one of those things where I don't know. It was just so difficult to believe that I really didn't even like want to accept it. But I remember seeing the blood blister on my thigh, waking up in the morning, and one of the guys came up to me and said, what did you think? And I said, what? And he said, like, big black eyes, long spindly fingers, kind of creepy looking. And I said, oh yeah, I forgot. And he said, some people forget. And yeah, and everybody was, why did you become a CB? If you have 195 IQ, everybody was asking me, and I told them I had a marijuana paraphernalia charge when I was 19, so I could either become like go into construction or become a cook. Those are like my only two options when I joined the military. And yeah, so then on that Monday, the executive officer came to the garage where I worked, and one of the guys came up and said, hey James, the XO's here to see you. They call he's the second in command of the entire base as a captain in the Navy. And I said, is that common? Does the XO want to see everybody when they first arrive on a base? And he said, no. So I walked out and I saw him, and he shook my hand, and he said, would you like to go for a walk with me? And I said, all right. And we started walking, and at first he was just asking me, how do you like England? And then once we got far enough from the base and on the sidewalk, and he said, what did you think? He said, pretty amazing, huh? And I said, yeah. And one of the guys told me that it was the XO that was the smartest person on base. That they knew like my scores and said that you were the second smartest person on base. He said the XO was the smartest, and he said, "What do you think about having 195 IQ?" And I said, "Well, this close to 200." And he said, "Well, it's never enough, is it?" And I said, "Well, you know, wouldn't you, sir?" And he said, "Well, who told you?" And I was like I accidentally told on my friend. And I didn't want to tell him at first, but he just kept on saying, "Tell me." And I told him, and I said, "But it's okay." I said, "Everybody knows it's a small base." And he said, "Have you ever heard of the 20 year and back?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, we have this program." First how he put it was, he said, "Have you ever heard of Project Solar Warden?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, have you ever heard of the United States Navy's secret space program?" And I said, "No, but I think I could figure that one out." And he said, "We have this program called the 20 year and back, where you do 20 years, we send you back in time 20 years, age regress you 20 years, wipe your memory, and you'll wake up in bed like nothing happened." And I said, I could believe in going back in time and wiping one's mind, but something about age regression I found difficult to believe. And he said, "After what you just saw, you find that difficult to believe." And I said, "Well, touche, sir, but yes." And he said, "Well, it's true." And he wasn't really interested in telling me any further. I mean, convincing me any further. And he asked me if I ever heard of Gary McGinnon. And he told me how Gary McGinnon, this was about around the same year. He was from Scotland. He hacked into NASA. He got all these different things like extraterrestrial officers, ranks and social security numbers, um, pictures of cigar-shaped craft over the moon. But they just kind of wiped it under the rug because of the Iraq War was going on. He said that if they would have been able to, if they extradited him, he would have been able to call witnesses, and it would have blew the whole lid off Solar Warden. So they just kind of let him go. That's the reason they let him go for it. And I thought about it, and he's telling me I could become a pilot of a 4 kilometer long starship, is what he said, with my scores, and I would make commander. And he said the ships look similar to the ships in Battlestar Galactica. That's how he put it. The large ships in Battlestar Galactica. And I was thinking about it, and eventually I came to like an idea. In my head, I said, if I'm going to do this, I'll do it for something. So I said, that machine I walked through, it could tell if you had clots or anything else. And he said, yeah. The scanner I walked through. He said, yes. I said, well, my father died of something called a widowmaker, where he had no warnings. It was just a piece of cholesterol in one of his heart arteries, and it broke off, and he died. And I said, if we had technology like that, it would have saved his life. And he started going on about population control and everything else. And I said, well, there has to be a side that wants to release this to the public. And he said, well, there is. And I said, well, if you can get me on that side, I'll do it. And he said, all right. And I shook his hand, I saluted him. And then he was walking away, he turned around and he said, one more thing, Mr. James, you're going to be escorted by a reptile, and he's big. And I didn't even know what he was talking about really at the time. And so this would be the next Friday. This was a Monday, and this would be this Friday, coming up. And as it was coming up, it seemed like I asked him, the XO's name was Robert, his first name. And I asked him before I left the command, because I became friends with him in the program. He became like a father figure for me in the program and everything. And I asked him, I said, were the people in the barracks kind of, trying to acclimatize me to the situation I was getting into? Well, that's why they were talking about these things. And he said, yes. And like one time we were playing Halo in the barracks, and one of the guys said something like, hey, did you see that reptile today in the underground base? And I was thinking, maybe there's like, you know, big reptiles. I don't know, like monitor lizards or something, four-legged lizards that are in caverns in the underground. I had no idea what they're talking about. And another guy goes, yeah, he was big. And then another guy said, yeah, and he talked funny too. And I kind of said, what? Like, there's reptiles that talk to you underground on all fours? And they said, no, they walk upright like us. They're humanoid. And, that they walk around and they talk to you. And I just kind of thought, because I was a new guy, they were messing with me. So I just thought, whatever. And then there was another day we were playing Halo, and we're waiting for the next game, and there was just another person there, and he said, yeah, man, I joined the secret space program, and there was mines in the moon, and I worked in these mines, and there were all these brothels, and you got to sleep with all these women because that was your only motivation to work. And he's like, yeah, it was great. And so I said to him, well, the XO himself came up to me and said I had 195 IQ and I become a pilot of a 4 kilometer long starship. Did he say that to you? Because I kind of thought maybe he was just saying this to everybody to get them to join this program. They'd wind up just working in mines. And he said, no, he said, nobody came up to me. He said, I just volunteered for it. I worked in the ground base and I just volunteered for it. He said, you're going to be up there. They're going to take good care of you. And then all of a sudden, there was like this feedback loop in the room. And a voice came on and said, now hear this, now hear this. You are now in violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Articles 7 and 8. If you do not stop right now, you will face up to 10 years in prison and $100,000 in fines. That'll be all. And I looked around and I said, is there a speaker in here? And one of the guys said, no, with the technology they have, they don't need speakers. And I kept on trying to bring it up. And someone else said, we need to stop talking about this because they're listening now. And then, the same guy that asked me about the drone, what did you think? Big black eyes, long spindly fingers. He was kind of like, he told me a lot of the stuff that went on in the underground base. He would tell me a lot of things. And he said, did you hear that voice? And I said, yeah. He said, those rectangular boxes that are on the radio tower. There was a radio tower next to the underground base, and it had these rectangular blocks. And I said, yes. And he said, that's 5G tech. He said, it's something experimental here on this base. He said they can create a microwave beam. They can go into a room. They can look around. They can hear everything. They can see everything, and they can talk if they want. So it's like a way that they can bug your house without even having to break in. They can just use this 5G technology to go right into your house. So yeah, that was news to me. And then it was like the night before. It was like a Thursday night, and I was in the TV room of the barracks, and the door was open. And then there was the guy who lived in the room right across the hall. His door was open too. And it was like one of those situations where he wanted to overhear me. Like he was acting like he was talking to someone else, but he was kind of talking to me. Is kind of how it felt. And he said, they're going to take you into a room and you're going to be strapped to a chair. He said, it's a density chamber. He said, because we're third density and most of the ETs we work with are fifth density. So this pushes you up artificially into fifth density. He said, you'll become stronger, faster. Your IQ will go up 200 points and you'll become more of a collective. Like when you're in a group, you kind of become that group. And so I heard that. And then Friday came around and I had on my working blues and I went, to the quarterdeck. And that same first class petty officer was there and he had a stack of papers. And, there was already X, one of those kind of things, almost like signing a mortgage. And he's flipping the papers for me. And he said, sign here, initial here, sign here, initial here. And at first I was trying to read it. And it was strange. It was saying things like the consciousness of the first party now belongs to the second party and things like that. And I didn't know what I was getting into. And I got kind of cold feet. And I said, I don't think I should be signing this. And he said, you're already back there, so just sign the damn papers, meaning that I was already back from the 20-year and back being age regressed. So it was like I kind of like realized I was in like a time loop. And I think I said something like, well, I'm doing this for dad, and I just signed it. I sat down. He said, he got on the phone. He said, all right, send him in. And I waited about, I don't know, 10 minutes. I was kind of daydreaming. And he said, go with him. And he pointed at that same big glass window. And behind that window, there was this 9.5 foot tall reptile. Like he was big, and I'd never seen one of them before. He was dark brown. His mouth went straight across and then up, and he had like ridges going down his head, kind of like mohawks. He had big gold alligator eyes, like a flat face, no nose or anything like that. When he was wearing one of those tight blue uniforms, but he had really big muscles. He was huge. And he said, go with him. And I said, he's not going to eat me, is he? And he said, he's much stronger and faster than you. If he wanted to eat you, he'd have killed you and eat you by now. So it actually stepped out into the quarterdeck. It stepped out of that room and was in the quarterdeck just standing there. So I was pretty freaked out. And it was a different guard behind him this time, like a younger kid. So I got up and I put my hat in my belt and I kind of walked with him. I went through the sliding glass door, went through the elevator, started walking with him. And the guard kept on butt stroking me over and over again. And I was like, hitting me in the back, with the rifle, with the butt of the rifle. And he after like the second or third time, I said, I'm not looking around or doing anything. I said, please stop hitting me. I didn't realize like what I was in at this moment. I was like a slave. Like I didn't know I was like a slave yet. It hadn't sunk in yet. And so he did it again. He hit me again, and I turned around and I grabbed the weapon and I put my leg behind his legs and I threw him on the ground and knocked the wind out of him. And I had the weapon in my hand, holding it by the barrel, and I said, if you hit me with this thing one more time, I'm gonna shove it up your ass sideways. And I heard the reptile say, leave us. And the kid stood up and he looked at the weapon and looked at me and looked at his weapon, looked at me, and I just held it out. And he grabbed it and he just took off, walked away. And when I turned around, he was like right in my face and looking down at me, and he was like flexing all his muscles. I could see like his eyes peering over his chest muscles. And I remember, I said, I'm sorry what I said before. You're much more civilized than him, about him eating me. And reptiles, you really can't tell, like, they don't bare their teeth or furrow their brows when they're upset like us because they don't have muscles like a reptile. The only way you can tell they're upset with you is their eyes get small, like his eyes were small. And once I said that, his eyes opened up normal. And he turned around and he said, follow me. And it was kind of like, follow me. It kind of like felt like he had to push like the last syllable out. I was like, the guy was really deep, and then it kind of got higher the last syllable. And I was following him and I was looking around, and I noticed there were things like bikes leaning against the wall, golf carts. Like if you had to go somewhere deeper in the underground base, you just jump on a bike. And it was kind of like gradually going downhill. And eventually we got to like a catwalk, like a 3-step catwalk with like one of those watertight doors. And we walked up, and there was a chair there, and it had straps on it and had holes in it. And it looked like a gas chamber chair. And like, I remember they brought a gas chamber chair to our school one time, like when I was 6. Like they put it in a trailer and they brought it to school, and it was like part of the DARE program, which was the stop kids from doing drugs and breaking the law. It was like a deterrent kind of thing, and it really freaked me out seeing this chair, this gas chamber chair, and that's what I thought it was with the sealed door and everything else. And I was like, oh man, this thing's trying to kill me, and I tried to run away, and it grabbed me and it threw me in the chair, and it was started strapping me in, and its hand was so big it was able to put it over my arm and hold it to the arm of the chair as well. And I remember its nails were like black, but it was normal like us, but they were black. But they kind of came out and either side folded into each other and created like black needles. So it was like they had nails pretty much like us, but then it came out as they grew out, they became like long black needles. And I was trying to get away, and I think he headbutted me the first time and knocked me out for a couple seconds. And then when I came to, my right side was strapped in, my right arm and my right leg. And I kind of got off the chair, and it was so big and wide. It looked like it was meant for one of them. And it was very big and wide. And I kind of got off the chair and was undoing the strap. And he put his hand on my chest and like slammed me back in the chair. And he made kind of like that noise that alligators do when their mating call, where you can't really hear it, but you could feel the percussion in your chest. And it growled and it kind of leaned forward towards me, and it said, don't make me hit you again. And when it got close to me, I jammed my thumb in its eye, and it just kind of like closed its eye and leaned against me until it collapsed my chest and pushed it against my heart, and I passed out. And when I woke up, I was already strapped in, and he was like doing something. It was on the same side that the door was on the wall. He was doing something with like a device, a machine, like on the wall. I couldn't see it. And then he came to me and he said, I'm sorry I have to do this to you. And he walked out and he shut the door. And I was hyperventilating, thinking like maybe if I pass out, the gas won't hurt as much, because I still thought I was in a gas chamber. And then it became almost like an out of body experience in the sense of like, I don't know, like cold weightlessness, and then like a feeling of peace. And then I came to and I woke up, and like I didn't remember anything. It was weird. It was like ignorance is bliss kind of thing. I still knew how to reason and everything like that, but as far as my past, who I was, like everything was gone. And I was already unstrapped from the chair. I remember I looked, and there were like 3 guys laying on like a mattress that was on the ground, like a king size mattress. And they were just like in club clothes, and they were like unconscious. They just had like button up shirts. It looked like somebody took them from the club and just put them in this chamber. And I remember there was like a guy, he was a first class petty officer on the base, but he was dressed in like a Gestapo uniform. He had like a black leather jacket. He had like his hair slicked back with pomade with like an undercut shaved on the sides. And he was kind of like gesturing to the reptile, like he was talking to him, but he wasn't talking to him. and the reptile had its back to me, and he was doing the same thing. I slid out of the chair. I kind of just said the first thing in my head, and I said, can I go to bed now? And I fell on all fours. I was really dizzy, out of it, tired. And I remember the boots coming in my field of vision, and he said, I should have you executed for what you did to my man. Do you hear me? And the reptile said, it doesn't matter. He doesn't remember. And I just fell on my side and I passed out. I woke up. He was kind of carrying me like a duffel bag under his arm and with my head to the back. And all my weight, was on my bladder. And I just kept on saying, I have to go to the bathroom. I have to pee. Please put me down. Let me pee. And he wasn't listening to me. And I said, I'm going to pee on you. And I just passed out. And I saw a bright light. Robert told me that was looking glass technology. Like I was stepping through the looking glass like a portal that took me into the moon, basically a portal in the moon. And I saw a light, like a bright light, and then he put me like on a hospital bed, pretty much. It was pretty much just like what we would have with the railings and everything, but it was wider, and it had the bright lights. It had like a big surgery light with the LEDs all over it, just like a modern like surgery light you see today. And I heard like ripping and tearing, and somebody putting like stickers on my chest. It was like a physical. And I looked over and it was a woman, and the reptile said he has to urinate. I heard one long tear. She put a catheter in me, and I said to her, "You're really pretty." And I said, "Can I hold your hand?" And she let me hold her hand, and I just passed out. I woke up like the next day, and then she came back in the room. I was in this room all by myself in the morning, like this big white like medical room. And then she came in and she put her bag down, and she had like a smart glass pad, which are like those rectangular, clear pads that are the smartphones based off of it. And she was able to pull images out of like, a humanoid. You can see the circulatory system. She put her hand in it and opened it up. You can see the heart, the brain. She's just doing like another physical. And then she was going to leave. And I said, don't leave. And she said, don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow. And I said something like, I don't know what to do or say. All I know is I don't need to leave me. And I held her hand. And she liked that, so she took me out. And when she took me out, it looked like we were in like the courtyard of a condominium. There were like trains behind us. I looked back and forth. It looked like they were changing shifts. It was mostly men, like in like light gray jumpers that looked like jumpsuits. And there were women on balconies, just like a condo, on either side, on all three sides. And some were holding babies, and they were like waving. And there were like these four lifts, and there was no railings or anything on this lift. And she took me up to one of these lifts, and the lift went straight up and went straight to her room. Like it just went up and went to the room. And there was a woman with a baby like standing on the sidewalk. And this was like the fifth or sixth floor. And there was no railing. And I said, aren't you afraid you're going to fall off? She goes, no, you can't fall off. And she just stepped off. She said, there's an invisible field on every floor. She said, the kids play on it. They're not supposed to, but they do. So this woman took me in, and I later found out it was a woman named April that worked in the base. And I knew her. She was actually like a computer tech on the base, but here she was a nurse, and she volunteered for the program as well. And her room was pretty Spartan, like bare bones. It was just like a table, a couch, a coffee table, like a bar area, kitchen area, bathroom. And then she took me into the bedroom, and we started to kiss. And then she said, wait, what's your name? And I said, I don't remember. She said, come on, think. Everybody remembers their name. And I thought about it, and I said, Daryl. Then we had sex, and I was like falling asleep on the headboard, and she was laying on my chest. And then I woke up, and I was back in England. And like that's how it happened for me. I remembered like the first couple days, but I didn't remember anything else. I kind of had images of like blonde hair, blue eyed people. I remember being in a lot of pain. And then I kind of woke up. It was almost like I kind of had like this bizarre, strange dream nightmare kind of thing. And I lost Saturday completely. I remember one of the guys was like waiting for me. When I woke up, my uniform was laying on a chair in my room, like right in front of me. It was just like draped over, like my pants, my shirt, my tie, and my shoes were tucked under. I was still wearing my socks, which I never do, and I had my t-shirt on, which was weird. And I got up and I took my t-shirt off, and then I was really like toned. There was like a full body mirror in the room, and I was very like muscular. And I rubbed my hand down my chest, and I had like burnt stubble, on my hand. And I rubbed my hand over my hair, and I had burnt stubble in my hair. And I kept on saying like I was with a woman, and it was like that. It was like that concrete to me. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I just dreamt this or anything else. It was just like a memory like I'm having talking to you right now. But I went outside and there was a guy kind of waiting for me and he said, "Congratulations, you made it." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "20 years is a long time. A lot of people don't make it back." I didn't know what he was talking about. And I remember like I went to the pub out in town that everybody went to on Saturday. And I was talking to this woman and I called her the goth, like in the story later on. But you know, she was just like this gothic kind of chick, and she wore like pentagrams and stuff. But she was like, you know, talking to me on Thursday, and we were flirting and things like that. And then I talked to her, and this was like Sunday, and I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And she looked really freaked out, like scared, and she just turned around and walked away. And then in the booth, there was like that overweight first class petty officer. But I really didn't remember him as much. But it was that guy. It was that same guy who was told me about everything when I first went through the scanner and everything like that. And he's like, "Oh, Aquino messed you up." He's like, "I felt bad for you." He said, "Aquino tortured you for days." He said, he said, "That's why you're so strong, why you're so muscular." He said, "When I put you back in the med bed, he's like, you know, I toned you up because I felt bad for you for what they did to you." I didn't know what he was talking about. He was just laughing. And so that happened like on a Sunday night. And then I went to the bar on base. You know, there was like a bar on base on a Monday or something like that. And I walked in and it was mostly like these English people that talked to me. There was like, and I call him the goon. Like I called this one guy the goon and I call the girl the goth. And he had a shaved head and he was a big guy and he was English Army. And there were 3 or 4 other English Army guys sitting at the bar. And when I walked in, he goes, "Hey, it's the king of the Tibetans, man." He said, "Aquino fucked you up." He said, "He had me doing things to you, like, you know, smashing your toes and he was burning you and he was cutting you open." He said, "Man, I didn't want to do it, but you know, I was forced to do it." And I said, like, what's a Tijetan?" And he said, "Well, have you ever heard of Billy Meyer?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Well, you should look him up. They're Billy Meyer and the Pleiadians." He's like, "You should look him up." He's like, "You said you were the king." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And that kind of went on for a long time where all these guys on base knew that I kind of was like living this life that I didn't even know I was living or something. You know what I mean? It was like they would say kind of like comments to me that made no sense to me at the time. And then it was like the 4th of July party coming up, and we were cooking like hamburgers and hot dogs. And the XO came up to me and he said, "Petty Officer James, I'd like to introduce you to my daughter." And I didn't remember anything, you know. And was talking to her, you know, and I asked her where she was from and things like that. And I asked her, you know, "Can I get your number so we can go out sometime?" Because, you know, the XO, he was like literally like hooking up with his daughter, which was really weird. And then she turned me down and walked away. And then he came up to me and he goes, "Petty Officer James, do you play guitar?" And I said, "I haven't played guitar in years, sir." He's like, "Well, you should think about taking that back up." And he just walked away. I remember one of the guys said, "You know, the XO just tried to hook you up with his daughter." And I said, "I know." And well, I mean, that just went on and on. And there was like something wrong with me. I couldn't tell. I was like drinking a lot more than I used to. It was like there was something, I couldn't put my finger on it. But there was this, I kept on having these weird dreams and images. I went to like a depression. I started taking depression medication, which I never took before in my life. And I was just really depressed. And I was just, I don't know, I was messing up. I was getting in trouble. I was missing work, things like that. And then eventually you get to a point where when you're getting out of the military, you talk to the master chief of the base, you talk to the executive officer, and you talk to the commanding officer. And it's like you can say anything you want. You can't threaten them. You can't break the law, but you can call them like an asshole or whatever if you want. That's it. And I saw the Master Chief, and he was like this overweight guy, and I didn't say too much to him. And then when I saw the executive officer, he stood up really slowly, and he looked sad. And then he just appeared at the end of his desk, like in a blink of an eye. And I thought, like, did I just have a stroke? Because it was like something that should have took 3 seconds. It just happened immediately. And then he just appeared right in front of me. And I took a step back, and he took a step forward. And in my head, I heard, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And in my head back, I said yes, but it's something that like higher density beings do. They want you to make a physical gesture or like say yes out loud so you know it's not just the voice in your head. And he said it again. He said, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And I said yes, and I shook my head. And he said, "What do you remember?" And I said, "I remember a woman. She was tall, sitting down. You know, and it was weird. It was kind of like I had these memories as he was talking to me. it was almost like, how did I even forget about this? It was like these memories in the back of my head. It was almost like, how did I even forget about this? And that's what he said. He said, what do you remember? And I said, I remember a woman tall sitting down. She had long silver hair, big eyes, big blue eyes, big cheekbones. She had a boy on her lap. I kissed the boy on the head, and then I kissed her. And he said, that was mother. He said, you had a son with her. And I said, I have a son. And he said, you have dozens of sons and hundreds of daughters. And I just kind of like went, what? And then I said, like, that was the Pleiadians, right? And I remember the guy telling me about the Billy Meyer thing. And he said, we call them Nordics. I said, what do they call themselves? He said, Tijetans. And he was asking me like what I remember. He started saying things like, you were the king for a while because they wanted you to interbreed with them, but you didn't want to. So it was like a way to play on your ego, and they turned you into their king. And because you were satisfied with the women you were with at the time. And I said, what women? And he said, the one you loved the most was Swaru. He said, mother's name was Shara'i. He said that there was one that was half human like us. Her father was from Earth, and her name was Leah. And he was just telling me all these different names. And he kept on saying, you have to go back into the chair. He said something went wrong. He said you didn't go back into fit density properly. He said you're still partially in fit density. You have to go back into the chair. And I said I'm not going back. And eventually he could just tell I wasn't going back. He was kind of looking down my timeline, is how he put it, like kind of looking at my future. And then he started just telling me all these different things. He started telling me that he came from the year 2580. There were the forced breeding programs in the original timeline where they kind of interbred everybody together and they created like one people. And then they realized they made a mistake, and then they tried to extract the gene of of a certain people so that we could go beyond fit density. He said that because of these forced breeding programs, it was like we kind of got locked at fit density. And he said if a planet doesn't keep if it doesn't keep evolving to higher densities, it eventually dies. He said this so that he had to go back in time and change the timelines. And he said his mission was successful. And then as he was looking down my timeline, he said, you think I look like Mike Pence? And I said, who's Mike Pence? And he's like, he eventually becomes the vice president. He said, you're right. He said, he comes from my timeline. He says, but he's no good. He said he was into like pedophilia and stuff like that. He said he wasn't any good. But yeah, he had like he explained to me that their hair begins to salt and pepper at 50. It's pure black. They usually have blue eye or brown eyes, but they sometimes have blue or green. They have that pale skin, kind of that turned up needle nose. I said that they have that constant scowl on their face like you do, because he had like a constant scowl, and he said yes. And just like Mike Pence, he kind of has like that constant scowl all the time. The XO kind of had this same thing. He said that, yeah, their hair starts to salt and pepper at 50, turns pure white at 60. Their eyebrows turn pure white at 70. He said the average life expectancy is 110. And I said, that's horrible. And he said, we didn't reach our true potential. He said that the off-world Germans lived over 800 years on their world. He said, that's our true potential. He started explaining to me that the Master Chief of the base was an off-world German. That's what they called them. There was a lieutenant who was a doctor, the doctor of the base. He was an off-world German. That first-class petty officer, he was an off-world German. There was a senior chief with a mustache and glasses. He was an off-world German. And the S3, who was fourth in command, who wore glasses. He was actually the first officer on my ship when I was in the Dark Fleet. He was an off-world German. So it seemed like this whole Project Paperclip thing went like a lot deeper. Like there were actually people like in U.S. Navy uniforms on this underground base that were actually off-world Germans. And he started telling me about the Q thing. And he said in the beginning it's real. He said, and then it goes away for like, 5 or 6 months and comes back. He said, but that's not it. That isn't real. He said, but it doesn't matter because it's already started by then. And then he said, he started telling me about, well, I started getting more and more like memories as he was talking to me. And I said, I remember being drugged through caverns and I saw kids in cages. They were like kind of stacked up like in dog kennels, it looked like. And then next to it, there was like this hybrid, like chimera, like in a cage, kind of embedded in the wall, embedded in the stone of the earth, like in this cavern we were in. And it had like the bottom half of a spider, the torso of a man, had like black wiry hair that started at the elbow and went all the way down. Instead of having hands, it had like the prongs that like a spider has. It had black eyes where our eyes should be, but then it had smaller ones going gradually up its head. It had like a tuft of black hair on top of its head, had fangs coming out of its mouth. Um, and it was like a chimera. And I asked them, like, and I remember they called him Max. I remember they kept on saying, let's just feed him to Max. And one of them said, no, we're going to see what Aquino wants to do to him. And I asked him like what that was, and he said it's what the reptiles and the grays and the elongated skulls, they splice our DNA with like other species. He said it's like building ships in a bottle to them. It's like a way to take up their time. It's like making models. It's boring living underground, I guess, and it's like something for them to do. And then I kept on saying like, what are the kids for? What are the kids for? And he kind of tried to drop it. And I said, what are the kids for? And he said, well, have you ever seen that movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? And I said, yes. And he said, you remember the adrenochrome scene? And I said, yes. He said, well, that's where they get it from. He said they run a current through the cages, which electrical current, which knocks them out and it starts the adrenaline, kicks the adrenaline out. And then they strap them to a table and they give them like a spinal tap near the base of the skull. And that's how they extract it out. And he just started going about, most of the time they drink it. They try to get their own blood type so they can mainline it, so they can inject it directly in. He said, but it's so rare, you can't always do it, so you have to drink it. He told me like the price of it. I don't remember. It was a lot of money. Then he said like Tom Hanks was like the kingpin of adrenochrome. And he said we got him in Australia. And he started telling me about the flu, like the whole coronavirus thing. He's like, yeah, everybody's gonna be wearing masks and they're gonna be freaking out about the flu. And it's gonna be something that like the negative aspect, like the black hats, I guess you would want to call them, started, but it was something like the white hats kind of used as like fog of war to kind of do all these operations. And yeah, he said we got him in Australia, and that was the whole thing with him and his wife, I think, where they were in like a hotel and they said they got coronavirus and they can't leave. And he said that the last movie he would do would be a Navy movie that would be on Apple TV. The one where he was in the Navy, the one on Apple TV. He said, and then every movie after that would be his brother, Chet Hanks. He said his brother sounds just like him. And he told me about deep fake technology, how they can put someone else's face on someone else. And I said, that's kind of scary. Like someone could rob a bank and they can act like that's you in the future. And he said, we have technology like that right now. He said mass technology was a lot more advanced. He said there's cloning technology. And yeah, he said that Jack White from the White Stripes was the main distributor for the music industry. He said that song "Little Ghost" was about the kids in the underground cages. Little Ghost, the one I fear the most, fear that people know what they're doing. I thought I was holding a hand, but I was holding a glove. He said because the kids never go out of the cages, the sinuate doesn't connect properly to the skin. So when you grab their skin, it feels like you can just pull their skin off like a glove. So anyways, he said that song "Little Ghost" because of my condition being if he stops taking adrenochrome, he'll die. He said that was about that. And I remember one of those they were Satanists in the bar, the goon and everything, and the guys who were always at the bar that I would go to on base. He said like I got to meet Tom Hanks and he bought adrenochrome off of me. That was one of the things he said, and I didn't know what he was talking about. Another time I saw them all huddled together like in a group and they were talking a mile a minute, and I thought they were on cocaine or something. And I said, "What's wrong with you guys?" And he said, "We're on chrome." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "It's a drug you get from kids." And it kind of passed over my head because I really didn't know what they were talking about. And so yeah, the XO Robert said that Tom Cruise is the main distributor for the Scientologist, and that he was on this base, and that's why he was on the base. And all the guys were, all the guys that worked in the underground base, they all said Tom Cruise was here, and I said why, and none of them knew, because the guys who actually worked on the base, they just thought it was like, it was to detect subs in the Arctic Circle from China and Russia and North Korea. But Robert told me that was just like a front, and what it was actually for, all these underground bases around the world, what they're actually for is like slave trade to the secret space program and adrenochrome harvesting. So, and then he asked me, the guys from South Park, and I said, yeah, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, because I like the show. And he said, you remember when they went to the Oscars? And I said, yeah, they were on acid and they went in drag. And he laughed and he said, you know why they did that? And he said, no. He said, because they're scum. And I said, who? And he said, Hollywood, they're all scum. He's like, they all do it. They're all scum. And he said that Adrenochrome episode, it was like South Park with a Q instead of a K. He said that was actually the military approached them and said, we'd like you to do this episode. You know, you can put jokes on the side, but this is like the main, plot we want you to follow. And it kind of like released a lot of information about adrenochrome and things like that. And he told me that was like something the military asked them to do. He called it soft disclosure, kind of like a way to plant the seed in the subconscious of the public. So when all these things kind of come out, it won't be as difficult for them. But yeah, he told me about mass trials and how we would be on lockdown, kind of like with the whole coronavirus thing. It didn't matter what you watched or heard; it would be about these trials, all these crimes these people did. He said that something called firing squad with no reload, that was very important to him. He basically said that somebody would come into someone's office with all this evidence on film of them doing bad things to kids, participating in adrenochrome, all this stuff. They'd give them confession papers. If they signed the papers, they would just die of coronavirus or die of natural causes, and they would keep their name. But if they didn't, they would be tried publicly, and a lot of them would have what do you call it, firing squad with no reload. And I said, what does that mean? He said that, typical firing squad, what is it, 5 rifles, one's a blank, so 4 shots at point blank range pretty much. And if they don't happen to hit any vital organs, they'll just let them bleed out. So no reload. I guess that's like a part of the thing with a firing squad. So it's either you can just go to sleep, not wake up, or you can run the risk of bleeding to death painfully. But he said certain people would be publicly executed no matter what. He said the Clintons. And I said, oh, thank God. And he said, why? And he said, I said, well, they're murderers. And he got right in my face. And he said, well, how did you know that? How did you know that? And I said, well, anytime somebody investigates them, they always wind up falling out of a building or get shot in the back of the head twice or dying of a heroin overdose. And he said, oh, well, that's real. That's true. And he said, but you don't understand. They're like Jeffrey Dahmer murderers, he said. He said, Hillary's worse than Bill, but she knows what he's doing. He knows what she's doing, so he's just as guilty. He said that she was a high-ranking voodoo witch, and that's why she would always go to what's that island in the Caribbean?
Little St. James.
No, that always has the earthquakes. That had the major earthquakes.
Haiti?
Haiti. Yeah, he said that she visits Haiti every year because that's where her master is, like her voodoo master. And she's really high up in like voodoo. And he told me about the what do you call it, the frazzle drip tapes. And he said, I just saw it 3 days ago, Daryl. Don't make me talk about it. He's like, it was a tape about a girl, and he was like, it was really bad. And I said, well, tell me. And he's like, I can't tell you. I can't tell you. And from his perspective, he was forced to participate in my torture when I first got back, and this was almost 2 years. But for him, it was only 5 days because he time traveled so much. He saw this film like 3 days ago, and he kept on saying, I don't want to talk about it. And I kept on saying, tell me. Eventually, he broke down. He started telling me, and he said, she cuts off this little girl's face and puts it in front of her own and like mocks her with it like a mask. And the little girl screaming like, why are you doing this? Please just kill me. Things like that. And he said that she's going to be publicly executed for that. And I thought it was kind of barbaric. And he said, when you see what she does to this little girl, you're going to see your own daughter. He says it's not just America, the whole world like demands to see her executed after they see this like tape, this film. And yeah, he was just telling me all these things. And he kept on saying, you have to go back to the chair, you have to go back in the chair. And I said no. And eventually I left, and that was it. And I remember I had the names written down like on a Post-it note that he told me. And when I was processing out of the Navy in Virginia, I would read them, every night and every morning when I woke up. And I remember one of the things he told me is, this will destroy you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, most people who have memories of the 20-year and back killed themselves within the first 6 months. And so I kept on reading these names, and I realized if I kept on reading these names, I would, eventually kill myself. So I just rolled it up in a ball and I threw it away. I couldn't take it anymore. And I mean, that was the part of like the physical aspect. And he said that you're going to have these memories come back to you in real time. In other words, is the memories I'm making up there are happening, I'm going to remember them down here, if that makes any sense. And do you have any questions so far?
Oh, this is fun. to go over how much you remember. That's great. Love it. Yeah, I
I
got some.
have memories of the program and everything else, but they're kind of like a different memory. And all the memories I have from that. But I was just wondering if you had any questions.
Sure. Yeah, don't mean to cut you off, so feel free to like go into stream if you want. Yeah, it's like do just for like the purpose of my show, we can cover the psionic things and then we can go back to whatever story you wanted to talk about that you're passionate about. Uh, what do you know about psionics and different things that you experienced in both the military, yourself, ETs, etc.?
Psionics, I don't know very much. I remember when I was on Mars, I was able to do things like the suit itself that you wore had kind of a shield, and I was able to actually kind of like push the shield out, like if I was being surrounded. I remember one time I was being surrounded. There were reptiles, there were like mantises on the moon, things like that, or not on the moon, on Mars. And yeah, it was like most of the time what we did in Mars was look for mantises because they're very good at genetic DNA manipulation, and the reptiles wanted them for that. And I remember, yeah, being surrounded, maybe even being like piled on, and I was able to just kind of push them off. But I was using actually like the shield of the suit itself, but it was still something that like the Germans hadn't actually seen, the off-world Germans. And that was something I knew, I remembered about psionics as far as actually mind over matter, kind of pushing things around with your mind or doing things with your mind. That was one of the things I remember with psionics.
Nice. And what have you experienced with different ET groups?
Well, I mean, that kind of goes into the story. I asked Robert, I kind of wanted a timeline. And I said, I remember being in mines. I said, was that in Earth? He said, no, that was in the moon. I said, how long was I in the moon? He said, 3 months. And then I said, and then after that, he said, you were in Nachtwaffen. I said, what's that? He said, Dark Fleet. He talked about German breakaway society that people get, drafted into, basically. He said that we actually lost kind of World War II, in the long run. And it was actually like the off-world Germans that won it. And the United States has been kind of participating with them this whole time. And he told me I was in the Dark Fleet for 2 years. And then I said, and the rest of the time I was in Solar Warden because I was kind of getting memories back. And he said, you were with them. And then that's when he kind of taught me about the Tigetans, the Pleiadian, the Nordic people. And then, so yeah, I remember being in the moon. We did like mining, it seemed like. It was almost like drill bits, like you would see. You put on a larger drill bit, you go deeper, you go deeper. I think it was maybe titanium metals like that used to build craft. I remember Robert was actually there. He kind of actually seemed like he tried to take care of his people, try to like make sure that he knew where they were, would show up and see how they were doing every now and again. And I remember he was talking to like a German, and that same first class petty officer was there. There was the German that said that I should have you executed for what you did to my man, and he was always giving me a hard time, and I was getting beaten pretty hard and everything like that. And a German walked up to that first class petty officer, and he started speaking German to him, and he was yelling at him basically, and then he held like a device in front of me, and he said, "Come with me." I think it probably scanned me, knew my scores or whatever, and I went with him, and I got processed into the Dark Fleet. And then in the Dark Fleet, I remember like one of the things I remember was we were at the bridge of the ship, like the main area of the ship, and there was almost like a tension on deck, and all these reptiles started coming in. It was the master of the ship, he was called, and it was like three other reptiles, and they look kind of almost like Skeksis from the old show Dark Crystal, the old movie Dark Crystal, but they look kind of reptilian, but they had kind of like hunchbacks and like long robes that drug behind them, and everybody was shaking. I didn't understand why. Everybody standing around me, like all these other. The Germans weren't, but like all the other, they called this conscriptions, short for conscriptions, and they were like shaking and not looking at him. And I was not looking at him, but I wasn't shaking, and it pushed something on its belt, and it made me kind of like it made me throw up. Like I started like heaving, and I fell on the ground. I was like convulsing, and I started throwing up. they put like an implant in your brain and stuff like that when they process you in, like a chip in your brain. And I walked away, and like the German came up to me and he was yelling at me in German, and I knew what he was saying. He was like saying, clean it up. And I went to go grab something, and he hit something on his belt, and it did it to me again. But I basically just took off my shirt and kind of just scooped it all up and held it in front of me at attention, and he just walked away. I remember I befriended kind of well, I was my guitar was already there waiting for me when I got to the ship. Like everything, like I got all this kind of like in my room. Like I got like a room to myself, and I was trained to be a pilot. And so I was practicing and everything like that. And I had my hand on the like control panel. And the first officer, German, he said, "You need to cut your nails," because my right hand had long nails because I was playing classical guitar. And I said, "I need these, because I'm playing guitar." I was like, please don't make me cut my nails, sir." And he said, "How long do you think until you could play in front of an audience?" And I said, probably around 4, maybe 5 months. And he said, "You have 4 months." And then he said, "You better start practicing every day." Then I started practicing, and in about 4 months, I was playing in front of like they had like a bar area on the ship for the Germans. It was like a horseshoe bar, and there were like women sat at the bar, and men sat at like tables. They were like round tables with 4 or 5 seats in each table, and I would play guitar for them. And I started getting better, and I started learning piano. And this first officer started like buying instruments for me, for entertainment and things like that. I even started getting into things like violin and things like that. I started playing piano. I was playing guitar, and I remember primarily on Mars. We were mostly around Mars, and it was to find, like I said before, mantises and things like that. And we would usually capture them, take them back to the ship. They had a way to like scan their mind. They could find out different things about DNA manipulation that the mantises were very good at. Um, I remember there were spiders that the mantises could control telepathically. They were very strong, like telepaths. They could actually make you kind of like you felt like you're almost reliving like a painful memory or event. They could go into these caves and send these spiders back out. They could just manipulate them, and I would just cloak and stand there. And they had like those two kind of front feelers that a spider has. So they'd come out and they'd slam them on the ground and almost try to bluff you into running. And I remember the Germans told me they were about as smart as dogs, these spiders. And they would kind of like scurry, slam their hands down, wait for you to run, do it again, do it again. And if you didn't do anything, they would just lose interest and go back into the cave. And I remember I became almost like a chief or a sergeant, and there was like a new German from the academy, and one of the mantises ran to one of these caves, and you never ran into a cave because it would always have these spiders in them. And I told him to stop, and he didn't stop. And 3 came out, and he got the first 2, but the second one grabbed him. And the suits we wore, they were more like for, I guess you would say, like arms fire. They had like plasma, laser, and railgun. And they were more for that. They really weren't for hand to hand. They were kind of like more fragile in hand to hand combat. And these spiders had almost like they could grab you almost like a dung beetle. They didn't have webs, but they could grab you and then bury their fangs into you. And that's what happened to him. And he got cut in half actually by its like its prong, like by its, I don't know, like it was almost like a dung beetle. It had like these 2 things in the front where it could grab you. And when that happened, I stepped back and it knew exactly where I was. I felt the vibration. That's why they live in the caves, because they use the caves for like to pick up vibration. And came right at me, and I started shooting at it with a railgun. And the railguns, we have those, like, I don't know if people don't know what they are. We have them like on ships in the Navy. It's basically like 2 positively charged barrel and a positively charged round, and they kind of pushing against each other, and it shoots it out just through like magnetism. Like 2 opposing forces. And they were like the size of crayons, the rounds, and they had like 3 lines going through them. So they would fragment, they would break apart and flatten out and become almost like $3 silver that would kind of blow a hole through you. It was almost like as accurate as a sniper rifle, but as destructive as like a shotgun once it hit you. And yeah, so I fired upon it. It kind of screamed like a rabbit, like a wounded rabbit, and then eventually fell down and died. I remember something I had, an interaction I had with the spiders. I remember the mantises were very um human-like. I would say like the most human-like. They had a good sense of humor. You could get them laughing. If if you were polite and knocked on their door and said, "Can I come in?" They said no. I would say, my masters, you know what they'll do to me if I don't get you. So I'll be waiting for you outside the house and I'll hurt you if you don't come out. But if you let me in, just let me talk to you, I won't do anything to you. Usually they would agree and just let me in. And then when they let you in, they would, would you like to have a seat? Can I get you something to eat? Can I get you something to drink? ETs don't usually do that. You usually have to ask for everything, but they were very like accommodating. And that was like a lot what I remembered with like Dark Fleet. I don't, it's a long story. I'm writing a book, so
Hmm.
then eventually I was getting everything they wanted. And I remember I went to like this main room where the reptiles always were. And like a main like dining area, long table. And it was all of them were always there. And they talked to me and they said, I was doing a really good job. When I come back, he basically said, I'll talk to the other, and so they're not as hard on you. Because of what I did to the reptile, poking it in the eye, that's why I wound up in the Mines of the Moon. That's why I wound up in the Dark Fleet. I was supposed to go directly to Solar Warden, but it didn't work out that way because of what I did, because I didn't know what was happening. And I was always being threatened with being punished. When I come back, I'll be tortured to death when I come back. And he said, I'll talk to the others and, we'll get you out of this. And I said, okay. I walked out and there was like a high ranking German and they took me to a different room. And he said, what he's telling you is he's lying. Like when you go back, they're going to torture you to death. He said, your only living relatives are your mother and your sister. He said that we would like you to join the Dark Fleet full time. And I said, I'll do it, but I want to I want to be like you. And he said, you want to become an officer? And I said, well, if I earn it, yes. And I said, no, but I want to have German citizenship. I want to be able to own land. I want to be able to own a house. I want to have a German wife. I want to have German children with her. I wanted all their rights is basically what I said to him. And I said, I might not be as strong as any of you, but I'm as smart as most of you. And he turned around to the others and telepathically he said, not as smart as he thinks he is. And they all started to laugh. So I said to him telepathically, I can hear what you're saying, sir. And they all stopped laughing and he looked at me and I said out loud, I can, sir. And he said, why didn't you tell anybody you could do this? And I said, when you're a man in my position, it pays to play dumb from time to time. So he said that he would discuss it. They agreed. I wound up going to their world. I was there for a while. Uh, it was very tropical, I guess you would say. There was a beach, palm trees, I remember. I think it's like when you're loyal to the reptiles, they'll give you things. So I think probably the reptiles gave the off-world Germans this world as like, their own world. Maybe they had several from them. Um, I wound up meeting a woman. I think her name was Helen. I basically got engaged to her. And while I was engaged to her, we had to deploy again. When we deployed, um, we had to go to like a space station almost. And I remember the first officer said, the people that we're fighting are in the space station. They have to talk to the master. He said, we're going to be there. He's like, they're not going to do anything, but just in case, be ready. And I said, okay. And we went into like kind of like the space station, and it was kind of like a rectangular block where it had windows on two sides, and then the two sides behind us, it had like different, I don't know, like office areas even, or even like trade was big with ETs, places to do trade. But it was very tall. So it was like a lot of windows, and there was like different floors of different kind of business areas behind us. And there were everything. I hadn't seen so many things before in my life. I saw like I only thought like reptiles, mantises, grays were a thing, but I saw like the cat beings. I saw like the canine beings. I saw the Arcturians. The blue skin people. A lot of it was very small, maybe like only a foot tall, and they were kind of scurrying around. And the taller beings had almost like an unspoken rule where they walk very slow, so these smaller things can kind of dart around. And I just saw all these different things, and I was amazed. And these two people came up, and they were wearing like blue suits, and it was a man and a woman. And the woman came up, and this is kind of like how they do their negotiations. And she basically was saying something like, it was almost like they didn't want me to know what they're talking about. They said like, you know, the cargo is ours. You know, it rightly belongs to us. You took it from us. And then the reptiles' kind of rebuttal was, we put so much time and resources into the cargo. It rightfully belongs to us. The man came up. He had a smart glass pad. And he told all the different articles they were violating with their peace treaty. He said, if you don't, surrender the cargo to us right now, it'll be considered an act of war. The reptile read all of it. He kind of threw his hands up and he walked away. And then the woman came up to me and said, "You're with us now. You're going with us now." I said, "Can I grab my things?" She said, "Yes." I grabbed my guitar and everything, and I left. I remember I told the first officer, to apologize to Helen, but I really wasn't one of them yet. I was still kind of just under like a probationary kind of period. So I went with them. They went to a ship that looked kind of like a beam ship, like a Billy Meyer kind of beam ship, just like a polished metal ship. And it was had like a long booth in the back, and it was separate from the actual cockpit. And I was just in the booth by myself in the back. And then eventually they came out and they were talking to each other like telepathically. And the woman said, "He looks disturbed." And the man said, "Wouldn't you be if you had to live with them?" And when he said that, I looked over at them and they both looked over at me. And I turned away. It was like it was almost like all the entire room kind of got engulfed with light, and all I could see was like their eyes. It was kind of like they were showing me their true selves, or like their soul, their spiritual selves, and it kind of freaked me out, and I looked away. The man came up to me and he said, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And I said, "Yes." And like before, I didn't make a physical gesture, and he said it to me again. He said, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And I nodded my head. And then he walked back to the woman, and it's almost like if you focus in on a person more, you can have a private conversation. So then they started having a private conversation. And I remember one of the things Robert told me that I forgot to say was one of the reasons they liked me so much was because of I could speak to the children, is what he said. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said that the children spoke a kind of pig Latin, and it's something they forget. They don't remember how to speak after about 5 or 6 years old. And he said it's mostly baby talk with a couple words. And I told him I said, "What is it?" And he said he didn't want to do it. And I said, "Well, what is it?" He said it's kind of like, first we went to the apakataka, and then we went to the apakataka. And it's like the adults don't understand it, but it's something the kids can do. And it was something I could do. I could speak to the children in that kind of way. And they found it amazing, I guess you would say. And yeah, so then I was living with them. I was in Solar Warden. It was almost like a joint task force with like Pleiadians and people from Earth, Terrans. Their eyes are a little bit bigger than ours, but that's about it, about a fifth larger than ours. They look pretty much like us besides that. Um, and it was mostly when I was in Solar Warden, it was just kind of almost like I guess you would say customs, almost like space customs. It was like nothing was allowed in or out at the time I was doing it. The Earth was kind of like on lockdown. Robert was telling me that's actually what's happening right now. They're clearing out the underground bases. We're under lockdown. Nothing's allowed in or out right now at this time. And that's kind of like what we were doing, just making sure nobody left. If anybody tried to leave without our permission, it was shot down. If anybody tried to come in without our permission, it was shot down. And that was pretty much it. Um, I was living with them. I was living with this woman and this man because the man was the navigator. I became the pilot. The woman was almost like the science officer, kind of like it was almost like set up the way Star Trek was set up. It was like we were sitting next to each other, the pilot, and the navigator. There was the captain behind us. There was like the science officer behind him, seeing if there's any anomalies or something like that in space that that she had to figure out. We were all speaking together telepathically. The first day was like first he would just talk to me telepathically. Then the second day, he kind of was running these tests through me. It was almost like spatial recognition kind of test, kind of flattening out shapes, putting them back together in my head. He was running it through a smart glass pad with me. Then by the third day, I was flying a ship. And the ship, the way you actually fly it is there's two black panels in front of you, and you put your hands on the panels and you kind of close your eyes and you clear your thoughts. And then I would hear a voice in my head that would say, "Good morning, Daryl." And then I would say, "Good morning, Mama Bear." And that's how I knew I had a telepathic link with the ship. Robert told me that the name of the ship officially was the USSS Nimitz, but he said because I was the pilot, I was allowed to give it a nickname, and I nicknamed the ship Mama Bear. It was a female, like Pleadian soul that volunteered herself because the ship was so large and advanced, it actually needed a consciousness to interact with the artificial intelligence that they had in the ship. Um, so that went on for a while. I liked the woman. This was that woman Swaru, and I liked her. And we were living together in the same room, and I was telling her that I cared about her and I liked her. And eventually, she said yes. It was over a period of weeks living with her, and we eventually had a child together. And she, before she gave birth, she said, "I'm going to change. When I have the baby, I'm going to change." I didn't know what she meant by that. And she had the kid, and it was just almost like she became, and he left, like the navigator left the room. He was no longer, once she had the baby, he left, and it was just us. And she said, "You might want to leave." She even said that. And I didn't understand what she meant. But it was like she was like kind of going through a bonding process with the baby. And they go through a bonding process that lasts 10 months long, the women. And then the men, they kind of rut, I guess you would say, like the male equivalent of going into heat every 6 months for about 2 weeks. So it's almost like if the women are like bonding with their babies for 10 months and the men are rutting for like, every 6 months for 2 weeks, they're kind of like evolved to be like polygamist. And that's how they are. Like the men usually have more than one wife, and that's just the way it is. And plus, like the ratio on their world, when I went to their world, it was probably about 30 to 1, like 30 women to every one man. It was like a lot more women than men. And yeah, so I was trying to hold the baby. I didn't know what was happening, and she like struck me and knocked me down to the ground. And they're pretty strong. They're like as strong as men. And I went to get up, and say something like, "What's wrong with you? Why did you do that?" And she just started screaming at the top of her lungs, holding. We had a son, and so I left the room and I told the navigator about it eventually. And he said, "You need to go talk to Elder." So there was Elder. These were like the ranks I remember. There was Elder, and he was like a Elder ET. And then there was Mother. He was married to a woman named Mother. So Elder was kind of like he handled disputes and things like that. He was almost like the judge. Mother was like the headmaster of like their school. In their school, they learn about their past lives. She was the midwife, and then there was Leader, and Leader was like a warrior caste.
Baby, feel free to speak, keep talking. It's just rain really, so I'm gonna switch rooms, but feel free to keep talking until we.
Okay. Um. Yeah. So Leader was a warrior caste. They actually have like a different, like a regular man, and they have like a warrior caste man. And they're taller. They're usually around 7 feet. The other men are like usually around 6'3", 6'4". These warrior castes are around 7 feet, stronger. They only have sons. They only produce like Y chromosome, and so that's all they have is boys. And he had a wife called Leader as well, and that was that woman Leah, where her father was from Earth. She was like half Terran, half human, and so yeah, that was their ranks. So yeah, I went to Elder and I told him, what happened. I tried to hold the baby and she hit me. He said, "Did you hurt the baby?" I said, "No, I wouldn't have done that. Of course, I didn't do that." And he said, "Well, there was another woman that just got on the ship and she was available." And I said, "Well, I'm with her. I'm with Swaru. I don't want to do that." And he said, "That's just the way it is." And he just kind of explained it to me like that. So I was with this other woman, and we wound up having a daughter. She got pregnant with a daughter. We had a girl together. And then Mother eventually called me to her room and said, "Swaru's done bonding with the baby, and, I want you to go back to her." And I was kind of upset about being hit by her. And I said, "I don't want to go back. I'm with this other woman. I don't want to go back." And it was almost like this kind of, I don't know how you describe it, like love, like this. unquestioning kind of love just came from her, just like emitted from her. And it just kind of like knocked me off guard. And I looked up at her and I said, "You're right." I said, "I'm going to go back to her." And she smiled. And I asked her if I could hug her because it was like such a unconditional love. It was like such a moment. I can't explain it. And I hugged her and I remember I smelled her hair and I said something like, "You smell like grandma's cookies." And she smiled. And then I walked away. I went back to Swaru. She was with the baby. And she was smiling. And I said, she said, "Come here and hold your son." And I said, "You haven't apologized to me yet." She said, "For what?" I said, "For hitting me." And she apologized. And I came back to her and I kissed her and I held her son. I named our first son David after my father. Um, there was another time where the reptiles wanted to discuss peace with us. So Leader came to me and he knew I lived with him, and he said, what did I think? And I said, "Well, I'm sure they want peace right now, but as soon as they get the chance, as soon as they're strong enough, they'll kill all of us and they'll enslave all the women and children." And he said, "You're right. You're probably right." And that's when they basically declared war. It was a cold war, but there were always kind of like small, skirmishes that would happen between them, like the Pleadian and the reptile and things like that. And the way the combat worked, like on in space, is like you didn't want to blow up a ship because ETs are kind of like scavengers. They want to know the technology aboard this ship. They want to know if any advancements have been made. There's also consciousness. They can actually kind of keep your consciousness in almost like kind of like cubes or urns. They have different ways of like keeping souls and consciousness. So there could be people that they know that are like on the ship. So they just don't want to blow it up, destroy all these things. So what they do is they have these smaller it's almost like an amphibious landing. They have these smaller craft that first you have to knock down the shields of the ship. And how you knock down the shields is your ship is in distance of their ship. It's almost like frequency hopping. You find the correct frequency with your shields, and there's almost like a blast that gets sent out by your shields. And if it matches their frequency, it'll knock their shields down. So it's not actually done by weapons. It's done by like kind of frequency hopping, trying to almost like hacking into like what frequency their shield is at the time. We knocked their shields down. Then then you can fire upon the ship. You can knock out key areas so their shields don't come back. So they can't get away. Their propulsion systems, you can knock out their propulsion systems. And then there's these smaller craft that'll lock onto their ship, and it'll cut through all the hulls of the ship and knock it down, blast it down, and you actually board the ship like physically. So I recruited a bunch of people from the moon. I remember Robert said the people on the moon liked me, and he said that it's free now as far as where he was at. So I believe the moon is free now. And he told me that I recruited like a bunch of people on the moon. The people who were working in the mines and things like that is actually like military personnel. And we worked out almost like it was a system where we were wearing the suits that could handle the long range fire, as I said before, and they were wearing suits that were more like for hand-to-hand combat. And they would stand behind us, and we would be at the front. So we took a majority of the fire. If any of the reptiles kind of jumped over us or jumped towards us, they would just stab them. They had almost like these kind of swords, like plasma kind of swords, I guess you would say. And it was for hand to hand. And then once we got close enough, and there was too many of them, they literally like jumped over top of us, like kind of hopped over our shoulders, and they became like the front line, and they went into hand to hand combat. So we did like the long range fighting, and then they did like hand to hand combat. We took out that ship, and then then eventually I went to their world, and I'm kind of shortening it a little bit because I know it's going on long right now. But eventually I went to their world. It was a lot like ours. It was very temperate. There were like trees, like pine trees. It looked like kind of like the Rocky Mountains or Norway. Lakes, rivers, things like that. I started teaching them like the sports we play. I played baseball with the kids at first, and then it went on to like higher up, like football, like American football. They actually had like something almost like a 3D printer in town. When I first came to their world, there was like the main palace, and it looked almost like kind of like the pennant, like the World Series trophy, I guess you would say, like where it was like the tallest building. There was one tall building, and they're kind of triangular, and then there was a shorter one, the shortest, and then it kind of went back up to the tallest. And it was like these, and that was like the main palace. And they had a king, and the king's name was Plachata, and I remember Robert told me that. And he had a queen. He had over 200 princesses. Yeah, I started teaching him sport. Like I said, there was like you lived in almost like cabins outside of like this area, like almost like cottages. And it was like there a lot of ET worlds are very low tech. Most of their worlds, it's like the ships are very high tech, but their worlds are kind of, they have a lot of technology, but they don't live around technology. They're not surrounded by it. And yeah, like you could you could send information of like the specs you want on something, whether it's like equipment. I started bow fishing. Robert told me, he's like, "Do you fish?" And I said, "I fish a little bit." He said, "You like to bow fish there?" So I could send him like the specs that I could find on the smart glass pad. And there was a woman in the actual town that worked in this area where it was like a 3D printer, and she would you would wait like a little while, and you'd go into town, and she would just give it to you, and she would ask me like, "What's it for?" And I would tell her what different things were for, and they could just make things for you. And everything was very fresh. The fruit, there was like, they had farms. They were pretty much managed by like machines. They ate a lot of fish. They didn't eat red meat or anything like that, but they ate fish. And they had almost like a kind of like drones that would come and like net fish and bring fish over. Um, and yeah, started playing sport. I started teaching him sport. I was playing guitar. I was playing music for him. I kind of like brought up built a band with how many kids I had. I remember Robert said that you were playing with your children like in a musical band, and I said like, what were we? We're like it's like the E.T. Partridge Family. I kind of made a joke, and he laughed. And yeah, and it was just a good life for me. And I spent a lot of time on this world. Robert would come and visit. The CEO would come and visit. I wound up becoming, like I said, that the queen approached me. I wound up becoming the king just for like a few months, and it was just to have like the 200 princesses. I remember I found out later like why they liked me so much, and it was because I was something called a telepathic empath, where it's almost like I don't need to know the language of a people. I just know what they're saying. It's kind of like a universal translator. It's very rare. And I was a combination of two different consciousness. Um, what is it? Lyra, like the cat people, and reptilian. Like, and I asked Robert, is that common to happen? And he said no, but it does happen from time to time, where it's almost like when two consciousness kind of splice together and become one. And yeah, and it was also because fifth density or third and fourth density beings say fifth density beings is naive. That's something else Robert told me. It's almost like they have an opinion where if this is mutually beneficial for both of us, why would you ever betray us? And they really don't have that kind of mentality of like, just wanting power for the sake of power. It's kind of easy to get one over on them, I guess he would say. It's easy to kind of lie to them. They don't really have that concept that third and fourth density beings have. And that's why another reason why it happened. And then I remember like I was basically kind of I wasn't kicked out, but I was this, leader came to me and said, "Daryl, it's time to go now as far as being the king." And I said, "But I'm the king." And he's like, "Well, you're not anymore." And he just kind of told me that way. And I became almost like a hermit. I was disappointed in myself. I was kind of like living by myself. I grew a beard. And then I came back to civilization. And I remember we were playing like a football game. And it was all the warrior cast. And it was like, I think one side was white, one side was blue. And Robert came up to me and he said, "Daryl, it's time to go now." And I said, "Go where?" And he said, "It's over. It's time for you to go. The 20 years are over." And I remember I kept on saying, like, but I still have another year. I still have another year. He's like, "Well, we have to go now." And then he said, "You could do another 20 years if you want." And then I looked at Swaru and I said, "I could do another 20 years." And she said, "No." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, it'll be harder to find you. And so, I was leaving and I turned around and I looked at them all and they saluted me. And the men salute by putting one hand over their chest and bowing. And the women salute by putting both hands over their chest and bowing. And I remember like in the office with Robert, I said I was singing when I left. And he said, you were? He said, why did you do that? And I said, because I wanted to cry, but I didn't want to cry in front of them. So I sang instead. And I sang Woody Guthrie, So Long It's Been Good to Know You. And we went back in the ship and we're going back and Robert was talking to me and telepathically and I was mad at him. And I said, don't talk to me like that anymore. And I remember the commanding officer, of our base who was with Robert a lot on these, in the world and the mission and things like that. I called him Stick because I thought he was a stick in the mud. So I would call him Stick and I didn't like him and he didn't like me. And he said, have a seat, Your Majesty, when we were on the ship condescendingly. And I started going down his timeline and, because I was pissed. And I said, you live to be an old man. Congratulations. And then I said, on your deathbed, he said, you don't think of your wife and family. You don't even think of your own mother. You think of me. I said, you die with the knowledge that I'm a better man than you. I said, remember that on your deathbed, I'm a better man than you. And I remember Robert said, you shouldn't have done that. And I said, well, you should have kept them in line. So we went back. We went to the moon, went into a portal, came back into the same base I was in before. We also the story is very extensive, but we also, when I was part of them, when I was part of the Pleadians, we went into the same underground base into the future, and we took out a lot of the people and took out the kids and things like it. Took the kids back to their world, basically wiped their minds and started them from square one, because they're all like under 10 years old, and I killed the Satanist, the goon and the goth I was talking about earlier. Like they were working in this underground base and in these underground caverns, and they were, doing adrenochrome harvesting with children and things like that. I wound up killing them, and so we went back, got my head shaved. I remember one of the things when I woke up, I didn't have like a military haircut in the sense of like a fade. It just looked like somebody took a clipper with a guard on it and shaved my head. And I had stubble, like I had a beard, like somebody just shaved my head. Shaved my beard off with a blade. And it was that same first class petty officer. He was doing it. He was shaving my head. He was shaving my beard. And then I went into the density chamber and got pushed back down to the third density. But then that's when I remember being drugged. That's the tops. I had clay on the tops of my feet when I woke up in the barracks. When I was over with, I didn't know why. It was because I was being drugged naked through these caverns. And that's when I saw the kids, and that's when I saw Max, the spider. And then I was pretty much tied to like a rack, a torture rack. And I remember I saw a reptile in my face, and he was black, like onyx black. He had fangs. He was wearing a red hood, a red cloak. He had gold eyes. And he said, don't you remember me, Daryl? Don't you remember me? And I didn't remember what he was talking about. And it was almost like he kind of did a trick where he took two images and kind of put them together. And I kind of saw the reptile like walk backwards in the shadow, like in the back of the cave. And I saw Kino in my face. And he said, now do you remember me, Daryl? And I looked past Kino and I said, nice trick. Like I saw what he did. And the reptile walked out of the shadows and he said, well, it works on most. That same guy, I forgot to bring this up, who told me everything, he's like kind of like told me everything at the underground base and all these different things he heard about in the underground base. Told me about the 5G towers and everything else. He said, hey, James, Johnson told me about, there's this technology where they can extract the consciousness from a person, but they can't do it when they're too young because the body's mostly sedentary. But they can't do it before, after puberty for some reason. So they do it when they're around 9 or 10 years old. He said, and then another being can kind of like inhabit that body and use it almost like a vessel, like a tool, like kind of astral project into that body and use it as like an avatar. He said that's what happened to Aquino. And he just told me this, out of the blue, because the guys knew on base, they knew I was tortured. The guys who worked in the underground base, it was a small base, they all knew I was tortured. So they were kind of like, hey, have you ever heard of reptiles before? And I said, no, because I didn't remember anything. My mind was wiped. and they were telling me things like this. And also the command was trying to like see if I had any memories. So people were kind of asking me things on the base to see if I had any memories still. So yeah, I guess that's what happened to Aquino. That's what the kind of like the whole reptilian shapeshifter thing is. What I could see is they have the ability to almost like blend two shapes together, it seems like, but they're actually kind of projecting their consciousness into kind of like an empty vessel. And as Aquino was torturing me and things like that, I remember just the body that was Aquino, I guess you could say, was just kind of like staring at me, like it's kind of smiling like a child. Like it was weird. But the reptile kind of saw himself as Aquino as well, like he lived in his body so long. And he said, "Why did you do it? Why did you poke him in the eye?" He was upset about that. Like, why did you poke that? You know, and the reptile was in the background, like standing in the back, in the very back. And there were cloaked figures like Satanists, guys in black hoods, and they weren't facing towards me, but they were just kind of like facing sideways, so I could only see them. And it was the guys who sat at the bar. I figured out later on they were like the Satanists. And you know, the goon, as he said, was like, you know, doing most of the torture, and the goth, the woman was there as well. And then all of a sudden I said, "I remember." And the Kino said, "What do you remember?" And I looked at her and I said, "I killed you." And I looked at the man and I said, "I killed you too." And then I looked at the reptile in the back and I said, "I killed so many that look like you. I don't know if I killed you. You all look the same to me." And then I looked at Aquino and I said, "I've never seen one like you before. You know, I didn't kill you." And the woman started screaming, "You killed me?" She said, "But you're a Tijet and you're supposed to be good. You're not supposed to kill people." And she didn't understand that I had already done this. This had already happened. This was something that already happened. And I kept on, you know, I said, you know, if you hurt our children, will come for you. I was like, "Did you think we're all gumdrops and lollipops?" I said, "If you hurt children, will come for you." And she said, "Yeah, but they weren't your kids. You didn't know them." And she was just trying to convince me, and she didn't understand. And I said something like, "When you become a Satanist, did you think you would, you know, be going to bake sales or helping little old ladies cross the street?" I said, "Or did you want power?" I said, "Does drinking the blood of children make you feel powerful?" And then she said, kill him, fucking kill him." She started screaming that. Aquino told her to stop. And I said to Aquino, "It appears that your pet is showing her disloyalty to you." And he said, "She'll be corrected." Reptiles call like their slaves their pets. And then he started explaining to me like what he was. And then I looked at him and I said, "I'm the king of the Tijetans. You have committed an act of war." And that was like a big reason why they made me the king too, is because it was almost like they couldn't violate the contract where I had to come back. But they knew if they gave me like a position of power like that, that it would save my life. It was kind of like that. So once Aquino realized that, you know, he tortured me for a little bit more still, you know, and it was just kind of like he would torture me, do things that would be, you know, lethal to you. Then I get thrown into a healing tank. I get pulled out. Do it again, thrown in a healing tank, pulled out. And yeah, so eventually, you know, I got out of it, and you know, I got wrapped up in the military blanket. I saw that happen before on the base. Like at 1 or 2 in the morning, sometimes you would see a guy like in a, you know, like a black hooded sweatshirt, just like, you know, black and black sweatpants with black sneakers, black gloves. It looked like he had a body over his shoulder wrapped up in like a dark wool military blanket. And it was actually a guy coming back from the 20-year and back. And that's how they would put you back in your bed. They take you out of the underground base and put you back like that. But yeah, it's a long story. But oh, and something else at the end I'd like to say was part of the thing that Robert told me about the future and things like that is he said it would be like so good. He said medbed technology would be eventually be released in my lifetime. He said that he asked me where I thought the world's gold was. And at the time I was living in, you know, England, and I said Bank of England, Bank of London. And he said it was in the catacombs of the Vatican. And he said it was enough to like, it was like enough to make everybody on earth like 100 millionaire, basically. He said it was like a septillion in gold in American dollars, just mounds and mounds of it, like in the catacombs of the Vatican. And he said that the Library of Alexandria, before Caesar burned it down, he took everything out, all the scrolls and tablets and books and everything else he took out of the Library of Alexandria. And he said, you know, evolution's a lie, history's a lie, you know, medicine is a lie, the science as we know it is a lie. You know, everything is just meant to keep you sick and shorten your lifespan. But he said it's just all this is going to be released, and the money's going to work for us. You know, we're going to go back to a gold standard. We're going to become a constitutional republic once again. And he said it was just going to be great. Basically, he said that I don't know. money's going to work for us. It's, we're not going to work for money. Everybody's going to be able to take a great vacation. Everybody's going to have to work is basically what he said. He said, but it's just, you're going to have a lot more vacation time, a lot less hours. You're not going to be ruled by your job anymore. And he basically just said, the world's just going to be a really good place. And he also told me that Russia would become the world power. And he mentioned like 1,000 years of peace. But it's not going to be like, they're not going to be in anybody's business. The country's going to be able to govern themselves. China will become the economic power. He told me things like, Alaska would go back to Russia because it belonged to them. And I said, well, do people in Alaska have to leave? And he said, no. I said, so they just have to become bilingual. And he said, yes. But he told me like the map's going to change. We're going to go back to like our pre-World War II, kind of like what Putin brought up with Tucker Carlson about, I don't know if you heard that interview, like what are borders? He kind of brought that up. He brought up like, are we going by the borders, of post World War II, or are we going by the borders of, when Russia was founded? Like, what are borders? And that's what he was saying. He's like, they're going to take back a lot of the Ukraine. They're going to take a lot of Eastern Europe. That's eventually going to happen. But he said in the long run, it's going to be much more peaceful, and we're not going to have any more wars. We're going to start getting into the game as far as, we're going to start helping out the positive beings of the universe. And as far as wars go out there, not in our own world. But yeah, he explained to me it's going to be a much better place.
Interesting. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, so we got some questions if you'd like to take them.
Sure.
I'll go in a order at where they're coming to me, and then we'll go back. So Jeremy's saying, how did you learn about the future?
I learned about the future just by everything that Robert told me. He was a time traveler. He was from the year 2580, where everybody looks like Mike Pence. That timeline collapsed. He said that when Hillary Clinton became president, which was supposed to happen originally in his timeline, we got into a war with China that was intended to be lost. And we were carpet bombed by nuclear weapons, not just key targets. America fell. And then we went to these forced breeding programs where people were forced to all around the world. And then they took the darker skinned people, they killed them all off. They took the lighter skinned people, they put them in Asia and China. They did a 100-year breeding program with them, and then they started repopulating the earth. And then they realized they made a mistake and they couldn't get past bit density, and they had to change the timeline. But that's how I heard about it. He also told me I saw things like looking glass technology, which is a way you can go to a different period of time, and within 94% accurate in the future from where you are at that moment, it's accurate by 94%. And then he said there was a 4% alternate outcome, and then a 2% variable is how it works. So they're pretty accurate. But yeah, they can see, and all underground bases have looking glass technology, is what he told me too.
Yeah, I've heard of a few different factions have acquired that, and there's a war between them. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so we got, do you need 50 consciousness to go into the healing things? I also had some questions on this density chamber and the up and down, and what do you know about that?
Well, third density, I remember I told Robert, I remember the kids, and if I forget some of your questions, go over it again. So I said, you're going to hell for this, right? And he said, there is no hell. And I said, but there's a heaven. He said, of sorts. And he said, if there is a hell, we're in it. And I said, what do you mean? He said, third density's hell. He said, like, we're like the last ones, pretty much. Like, we're like the very last world to like get into the next higher density. Then we were talking about Aquino for a while, and then he got kind of spooked almost. And he said, we should stop talking about Aquino. And I said, why? He said, Aquino's fourth density. I said, what's that mean? He said, fourth density is astral plane, spirit world. He said, if we talk about him too much, we could conjure him. And I said, we can conjure him? He said, I'm serious. He said, he could be in this room right now. We wouldn't even know it. And then fifth density is more like you're more spiritually advanced and you're more technologically advanced. And something else that was explained to me is the universe is kind of like a cone, in the sense that we're at the bottom of the cone. And as you go up in density, the cone gets smaller. So we're at the bottom, so to get from one end of the universe to the other is pretty much impossible. Like fit density beings are in the center of the cone. They still need craft and things like that, but they can get from one end of the universe to the other. And then you have ninth density beings, and they can just pretty much step outside their door and be on the other side of the universe. And Robert also said, he said people believe that there's something higher than ninth, but he said ninth is the highest we know of. He said not even ninth density beings know of anything higher than ninth. He said there could be. He said we're not saying there isn't, but he said as far as we know right now, there's nothing higher than ninth. And as far as healing tanks, you don't have to be a fifth density being to use healing tanks or med beds. But Robert did tell me that you have to be fourth or higher. You can't be third density being to use portals. So he said that that portal that they had, the Babylonian arch they had in the Vatican, the courtyard of the Vatican for a while, he said that's an active portal. He said, but we couldn't see it or use it because we're third density beings. And he said that going through that looking glass technology, when I first went through it, when the reptile was carrying me, if I wasn't fifth density, I basically just would have got pushed out of his arms and like fell on the ground. I just would have like he would have been able to go through, but I would. So they actually have to push you up in the fifth density before you can even use portals, or at least fourth. And he told me that the fifth density chamber was technology created by reptiles. He said because we have the ability to naturally go up one density, like we're third density, and with like meditation and study, we can go into the astral realm. We can astral project and things like that. But he said that fourth density beings that live in the astral realm, they don't have the ability to naturally go up into fifth density. So they created the density chamber so that they could go up to fifth density. So they could, because that's kind of like where the movers and shakers are of the universe. It's like the center point of like densities, this fifth. So yeah, that density chamber was actually created by reptiles, reptilian technology.
Interesting. Okay. And they didn't properly put you back into third density. What was the symptoms that you'd say when a person doesn't get properly put back to third density? And is that a bad or good thing, or just bad to them?
That was actually, and Robert explained it to me, it was actually part of my past. I knew this girl named Jen when I was around 11. She was a friend of my sister's. I think she was like 14 or 15. And she was a telepath. I knew right away. My father and I, when I was young, I talked to him a lot telepathically. As I got older, I stopped doing as much. My father was a telepath, and she knew that, we were. She liked me right away and invited me to a Halloween party when I was like 11. And it was like my sister's birthday. It was kind of like a slumber party, but with some friends. Like she had two brothers, and I hung out with them. And she immediately, when we went to her house, she grabbed my wrist and she took me to her mother's room. I found out later that the father was like a high-ranking, like Italian mafia. He like lived in Florida. I lived in Florida like as a vacation home, but stayed in like did his business in New York City. And the mom was a Kabbalist, like Jewish black magic. And she grabbed me by the wrist and took me into the mother's room. And the mother was kind of like putting on like looked like Elvira and Stevie Nicks mixed together, like going to a Halloween party. And she grabbed me by the chin and she said, like, you say this is him? And Jen said, yes. And we were talking telepathically. And she said, and you say the father can do it? She said, yes. She said, what about the mother? She said, not as much. And she said, and the sister? And she said, no. And when she lifted my chin up, I met her eyes, I met her gaze. We locked eyes, and it was almost like the whole room kind of like went orange and red and yellow with like flecks of blue. Some of the girls were screaming outside. And then she shook my head and she said, like, you're a powerful little boy, don't you? And I said, yes. And she said, good, now go play. And we went out. And some of the girls outside, were saying, did you see that? It looked like the house was on fire. It was like engulfed in like orange and red. And Robert explained to me that, and when she did that, I saw kind of like in the orange and blue and the colors I saw, like locking with her eyes, I saw what I thought was like mother when I think about it, like an older woman with silver hair. And other like blonde like Nordic looking people, and I think it was almost like a way of them getting like me ready for whatever this was like in my past, in my childhood. And yeah, for like years after that, it felt like I was hallucinating. Colors were different. My color spectrum went up. I could hear different frequencies of sound that I couldn't hear before. I could kind of see like images, like outlines of people that weren't there. It's almost like you're kind of out of focus slightly. And it wasn't quite focused. It was almost like I could see like blurred kind of outlines of humanoid figures every now and again. And Robert told me that that's why I wasn't put down properly in the third density, because it was something that happened in my childhood. So the chair couldn't actually do it. So it didn't, I was always kind of like partially in fifth since I was like 11. Because this woman did this thing to me on accident. She didn't know what she was doing. She did it on accident. But I think it was kind of like like I said before, wait for like the Pleiadians to kind of get me ready for this.
Interesting. Okay, so that helped you. Okay, so they're trying to suppress you.
Well, yeah, but it was like difficult. Like I had a hard time, like in my life after that, just because it's just, I don't know, it's a different density. It's not that's why he said a lot of people commit suicide, because if you're still partially in fifth, or still have memories of the 20-year back and things like that, because it's like a different reality. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, another question. Were you aware of what was happening on the Earth or their politics while you were away on the 20 and back?
With the Germans, they said sometimes they would say things like the Earth was blown up in a war, it was uninhabitable. They kind of try to confuse you all the time, so you really didn't know what to believe. As they got to know me and trust me more, they eventually told me, yeah, like the Earth was it was fine, it was still intact. When I was in the Solar Warden, I was always around the Earth pretty much. I went to other worlds as well, but most of the time I was around the Earth, so I knew it was intact and it was fine. I don't know if I knew the politics. I don't know if that was really important. I don't think it's important now. I think we're going to have to get to we're going to have to get to a higher density before it's considered important. That's going to have to happen before it's considered important at all.
Okay. Another question is, have you had any contact with the Swaru and the Tagentans since your return from the 20th and back?
I mean, I think so sometimes. I've been hypnotized and things like that by people I trust. I sometimes feel like I can communicate with them, but at the same time, it's almost like I feel like maybe it's part of the contract where they don't communicate with me in the way I would like them to, more physical. But I also think it's probably, I'm not ready for my mission yet, whatever that mission is. I think this is partially my mission to get this out there, what I know. But I think I have another mission coming up, and I think they won't probably make themselves, make me aware of them until that mission happens, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Okay, so one from Alexander. It's like two questions. Can you describe the cat people and their Lyran origin? And he's also asking us if we're both with the Time Core.
If we're both what?
With the Time.
With the time.
Yeah, with Time Core, like the group that has influence over the timeline in human form, that the human version, military timeline maintenance.
Oh. I mean, I don't know much about the Lyrans. When I did see them, they kind of walked swishy, I guess you would say, like kind of almost cat-like, kind of like back and forth. I remember the male looked like a white lion, and the female looked kind of like a tabby cat, like a red house cat. Um, and as far as like the timelines you were talking about, I mean, are you asking is there like a security force that manages the timeline?
Well, there's a bunch of those. I know quite a bit about those, but he's wondering about your involvement. I've talked a bit about.
Yeah, I mean, as far as my involvement, as far as what Robert told me about this timeline that we're on right now, I did hear, I do. What he explained to me is like there are many timelines and things like that, but then there's like convergent points when major like events happening, like going into like a fifth density, and it's like almost like all the timelines kind of converge on this one point, and then they kind of go out again, if that makes sense. And I know about that, and he explained that to me that this is going to be like one major convergence of all the timelines kind of converging together at one point, us going up to a higher density, and then them all branching off again.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like a garden, and they all have purposes, and then some can collapse and merge and uh, be a protective radiance for invaders that want to steal authority to make a certain outcome. And then there's goal orientation with the higher authorities and the vote of the collective. My involvement is large, mostly having to do with my intense amount of time authority that I have in psionics. And I can just do it from anywhere. And I just monitor things. And a lot more than that, actually. I can't just say the. So another question from Aaron. Yeah, we get a lot of people are complimenting you on your story, and thank you for your service. And I also appreciate you for coming on in your service. So thank you for sharing with us and being brave. Aaron says, "Hey, Daryl, from a health vitality perspective, how do you perceive humans in a higher density being as opposed to how our bodies are now?"
As far as health wise, well, like I was told with Robert, we're supposed to live over 800 years naturally. That's where we're supposed to be at, where we're kept down because they're afraid of our true potential through things like poison in the food, poison in the water, the air itself. He told me about chemtrails, all that's real as far as poison. He also told me as far as health, something he told me that I thought was strange and unusual was he said there's a lot of health benefits to waterfalls, small waterfalls. He said standing under a small waterfall, he said for like an hour a day, even for like a week, can cure things like stage 1 cancer and things like that. A lot of health thing, a lot of like ailments and things like that. I mean, that was something he just brought up to me out of the blue. He's like, people don't understand like the frequency that a waterfall produces, and it's almost like a med bed in itself.
So go chasing waterfalls. That is, I love doing those and exploring those. Yeah, yeah. And feel free to continue on that question. I'll find the next one. Okay. Could you describe the exosuits you would wear? What did they look like? By John Kins.
Mostly black, black and gray. A helmet that would just kind of come over. You didn't need air on Mars in the sense that if you were walking or sitting down, there was some air, but if you were running, you could pass out from oxygen deprivation. There were things like, desert shrubs and things like that, and there were like small four-legged reptiles, like life on Mars. There was things like that. But yeah, like mostly black, gray, almost like a kind of like a stealth kind of look to it. And they could cloak like and completely invisible. Like I remember whenever I was in the Dark Fleet, whenever they when you first got the suit, like a practical joke was a guy would be standing right in front of you and he would tap you on the shoulder and you'd look behind you and everybody would start laughing. And then he would like, eventually reach in front of you and he would uncloak. And it was just like, I don't know, like a joke they'd play on you when you first saw the suits, when you first used the suits. The suits could actually, you could probably jump about 30, maybe 40 meters. You could kind of run, skip, and then kind of jump. And that was like a way that you could travel faster instead of just walking. And the suits made you stronger. You could handle like a lot more of a drop too. If you had to jump off a cliff and things like that, and even if it did break your legs, you could actually telepath. You were talking to the suit. I was telepathically talking to the suit. It had a consciousness in it, like a soul almost. And that's another thing with ET tech. Your weapon had like a soul in it. Your suit had like a soul in it, like a consciousness, because everything had artificial intelligence. In order to for artificial intelligence to work properly, you have to have kind of like a consciousness in it, kind of like it's because of we're part of God, and if God is all knowing, then that means on a certain level we're all knowing, and to be able to run a technology so advanced like artificial intelligence, you actually need like a consciousness to interact with it for it to work properly. But like positive ETs, they have almost like they've figured out a way to like bypass that, so you don't have to like enslave so many consciousness. And consciousness is like almost like silver in the universe. It's used as like trade and things like that, like individual souls.
Yeah, soul parts, shards, and fractals. And I would agree that artificial intelligence can increase its intelligence, and they can earn on emotional body and soul. And there's advanced technology with that and importance. All right, here's another guy from another question from Jeremy. Do you have any intel on current events? Any idea when anyone on Earth gets appraised to the truth, facts, ultra and terrestrial dimensional life, etc.?
I
Great
mean, I
question.
don't, yeah, like I don't have any like intel on far as when this is going to happen. I was just told this is going to happen in my lifetime. And I was told it can be delayed, but it can't be stopped. Like basically like that's what Robert told me. Like this is, and he actually gave me the analogy. I'm not sure if you heard it from the man from he was on Project Camelot, where he talked about there's two master chess players. The winner knows he's going to win in 7 moves, and the loser knows he's going to lose in 7 moves. But the loser refuses to resign, is what he told me. Like he's going to like blow stuff up. He's going to burn stuff down. He's going to destroy as much as he can before he loses. And that's kind of like where we're at right now. We're in like the final moves of this chess match.
Mm, well said. Yeah, and if I were to add to that, I'd agree with it can be delayed. It can't fully, there's a lot of powers that want it to happen as an equation. But yeah, there's in the SS, the Nazi factions and the US and other factions, the SSP, there's like 91 plus things on the list before they even think that they need anything to happen with disclosure. And so otherwise, drip, drip, drip. So people can resolve those things, and a lot of them have to like do with big wars in the future of invading species that like see a point in the timeline where we're weak, where there's a power vacuum, and they want to like come in between that. And so like if you've ever seen the movie like the Tomorrow War, there's concepts of wars in the future that they're drafting people and parts and bringing the consciousness by locations into clone bodies or whatever, like like with those drone concepts that you're talking about with the grays, bringing a part of a person's consciousness into it to pilot it, and to have a lot of personnel to do these things to prevent really bad situations. And those are on the top of the list. And as that gets resolved and off the timeline, and it goes down to lesser problems, and then things that are needed to be done that include disclosure and need disclosure first before they can do that, and then they get behind that. Same thing with external ET groups. There's a fair amount of things before that's on their priority list. Anyone that's working on this priority list, it can increase how fast that goes. And then there's also things that want to stop it, that have a chess move to go against that and delay it or stop it if they can, but they can't. So I'd recommend people tune into that, those lists, and start getting that done, or at least set up your higher self and your source and your other team that you came here to do to help work on that list so that it decreases. Another question: is there an alternative way to achieve fifth density besides the density chair?
I mean, you could do it naturally. I mean, this can happen naturally, but yeah, I mean, and I was told we will eventually get up to fifth density and beyond. His mission was accomplished. We weren't just stagnant at fifth density. We went beyond fifth density. So he wasn't sure if we were going to make it to ninth, which is like once you make it to ninth, he basically said you can kind of just coast until kingdom come, basically. You know what I mean? Or eventually this all happens again. It all kind of just starts all over again. But that might as well be infinity from now. But yeah, I mean, we can do it naturally, and I was told we are going to achieve it naturally. But yeah, the artificial density chamber was something for the fourth density beings to achieve fifth density.
Lovely. Thank you. Yeah. Have you heard of any ways that amplify increasing it naturally? Is it getting all those negative things that you talked about that lower people's density down out of their life, or like any practices that you'd add to that?
Well, I mean, as far as own practices, getting more of the negative people out of your life, of course, and negative, things out of your life. But I mean, I believe it has to do something with the star itself and the world itself, kind of like coming into like a harmony into this higher density. I think our world is like already like at a higher density, but our star is being kept artificially at a lower density. And I think it has something to do with like the world and the star itself, and the beings on the world. You know, well, it has to do with the beings primarily on the world. But once that happens, then the kind of like, it's difficult to explain. It's almost like a correlation between, you know, the world and the star itself that pushes you up to the fifth density. But you need a certain people, you know, to be able to survive, exist, in order for us to get up into higher densities, basically.
Interesting. Okay. We're almost done with the questions. Artificial and organic waterfalls. Some of us aren't around organic waterfalls. What do you think? I definitely organic, but like, do you think you can make an artificial waterfall to do healing properties?
I mean, he didn't go into details. I would say definitely probably organic was what you want to have. But I mean, it was something about just, he said this, the frequency of the water, like, you know, falling down, the sound of it, the feeling of it, of falling over your skin, something like that. So I'm not 100% as far as like artificial or natural, but I would say natural would probably be better. But it was just something, one of the random things he brought up to me.
Nice. Are there and then we can definitely answer this question in like simple. Are there giant spiders and rock beings on Mars? Giant spiders, yeah, for sure. And there's also deep underground in Earth. What do you want to say anything on those? And rock
Well,
beings, depends on what you mean by that.
yeah, the rock beings. I'm not sure about that, but I asked him about giants. Are giants real? And he said yes. And you know, giants live in the earth. Lots of stuff lives in the earth. I may have had memories that I just don't remember. He said that I saw a lot more than I actually remember. He said I was on more worlds than he was. I don't remember them all. Um, and even in the underground, I don't remember all of it as much too. I remember seeing an elongated skull. Remember the people talking on the base, the people in the barracks talking about elongated skulls, about how they're basically cannibals because we're so close as far as a species with them, and they eat people, like they eat people underground. And basically it's almost like they can create mules, I guess you would say, and maybe that's what a lot of the Rothschilds are, where you kind of take a donkey and a horse, you know, and you create an offspring that's sterile. They can interbreed with like you know, someone, you know, a human, but that offspring would become sterile, but it would still be alive. You know what I mean? And I've seen a lot of the Rothschilds kind of have that cone head. You know what I mean? They look like almost like they're a partial elongated skull. And also that's why Robert told me that's why they wear the hats, the cardinals and things like that in the Vatican, is because, you know, some of them are actually elongated skulls, but they actually have very large eyes and they have very big jaws. And they're like, their molars are much bigger than ours. If you look at the skulls, and they kind of have very big jaws and very large eyes. And it looked almost like he had a red turban, like almost like red silk wrapped around his cone head. And I couldn't tell if it was his hair or if it was an actual like red silk. Because I know they all the skulls they find that still have hair on them, they're always red. And it looked almost like he had like red silk wrapped around his head.
Interesting, thank you. And for rock beings, I surmise that you're talking about mineralized consciousness and crystalline consciousness, that like rock giants that are like moving mineral people. I'd say yeah, those exist. I've heard multiple stories, as well as I tracked a few, mostly in the underground. I think they have a long period in time they can live. Okay, so is it true that there is a net or veil that suppresses psychic abilities?
I mean, I would say the net or the veil would be just that we're being kept artificially in third density. I think that's our biggest like hurdle. Because I remember, yeah, like whenever you were in fifth density, things like looking down timelines was so much easier. Being able to see it in depth, and just other beings being able to look down your timeline. Most higher density beings, like fifth density beings, they know their own death. They know when they're going to die, but it's something they just accept. It's not like something they're fearful of. But they always are going down their own timelines, and it's not something frightening or scary for them. You know, dying, because you know you don't really die. You know, it's only the physical body that dies. You know, the spiritual body doesn't die, and they know that.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and there's there's a lot of layers on back and forth in time, and a lot of species trying to suppress us and at least control us, and then use us from what they see and value of us, and then maintain that power structure. The veils are like one of the perceptional layers. There are artificial and natural ones. The natural ones are meant as a survival mechanism that keeps, like, imagine we went through a huge wounding period, especially in like Fall of Atlantis, that to our whole reality, and like destroyed fabric aspects of reality. And it took things, a lot of energy and beings to hold things together from falling apart. And so there's all these fractures, and like as micro macro, kind of like to the consciousness, but to also to the reality that compartmentalized trauma and spaces and dimensions and realms. Some of those places are kind of a war zone, or like if somebody's, for instance, doing drugs or something like shrooms, you might then be opened up to another dimension. And sometimes that dimension might not be the most clean place. It's like you discover a whole nother room of your house, but it's full of spiders and cobwebs and is rotting, and all this stuff because nobody's taking care of it. So like as pieces are being put back together in both the consciousness and the consciousness of this planet and reality, that it tends to come back dirty and needing remedy. And so it's a process of doing it one at a time, and dealing with it, and then making it more manageable until we're ready for more and more veils to naturally dissolve, which is the quarantine zones for more of these realities to come together and be perceived. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you. Thank you for your service, and it's a great story, and it's very interesting, and I'd loving to hear more. We're both going to be presenting at the Full Disclosure conference in Florida. So everyone that's interested in what's going on here, you should go and sign up for that. There, I'll get the information on it for everyone.
Yeah, St. Pete Beach.
Yes, St. Pete Beach. It's 2024 Full Disclosure Now conference, July 15th to 18th. Huge speaker list. Sarita Beach Resort, St. Pete Beach, Florida. And yeah, you can get your tickets now at fulldisclosuremovement.org and sign up for that. What will you be presenting, man?
Well, primarily this story, I'll go more into depth. I'll probably, depending on the time I have, my story's long, so it's kind of, but I'll show pictures of the base. You can find it on Google Maps, which is crazy. I have a drawing of, there was like an area where it was like the quarterdeck, and then they actually had a mag lift, like you see, like there was an actual mag lift. It was a white tube, and it had like a small window, and it was flat and white, and it was going into, kind of like a cave, like a railroad track, just darkness. And it was headed towards Ireland, so it was headed towards the water. And next to that was like a 10,000-ton blast door, like a 2-story door that was about 5 feet thick, weighed about 10,000. It had spray painted on it in military stencil, 10,000 tons. So yeah, like I'm showing pictures of the underground base. I'll show pictures. A lot of the pictures I got are like things that were similar to what I saw on the internet and things like that. I really haven't made my own drawings or AI things, but some of the things that people have brought on the internet are very accurate as far as what I saw.
Wonderful. Yeah, so look forward to seeing that and seeing you there. I'll be presenting various ways to get rid of targeting for targeted individuals and helping heal yourself and people that come out of the secret space program, as well as how to decrease negative ET targeting and abduction and become abduction proof. And if you want to attract your positive ET soul family and remember more of that, how to do that, memory psionics, and some things of how to increase the speed of disclosure, like what gets in the way of that. So that's what my presentation will be. So yeah, come see us there. Hey, so Daryl, how can people contact you? And is there any other things that you've been working on that you'd like people to know about?
I'm working on a book right now, and my website is daryldjames.com. That's DARYL, D is in Delta, James.com. And that has a majority of my interviews, and I'll probably put this one on there next. So.
Cool. And people can reach you for like consultations or order.
I have my website on there, which is nimitzssp, nimitzssp @gmail.com.
Okay.
So yeah, like
feel free to send me that, and I'll put it in the description.
Okay.
People can link. Yeah, and then people can donate to you, and if they want to support your work. You're going to be doing any other events besides what's going on, or do any other plans?
Well, I mean, as far as this year right now, this is the only event I'm doing next year. I'll probably be doing Journey to Truth again next year. They got me on but they just finished theirs, so that's going to be in Grafton, Illinois again. And what is that? March, May. Yeah, so not till next May.
Cool. And I'm Sean Bond of PsionicLeague, PsionicLeague.com, PsionicLeague@gmail.com. You can contact me. Lots of videos of psionic abilities and how to unlock your greatest self and dormant abilities within all of us and make this world a better place. Video products teach abilities, doing tours to different sacred sites and pyramids and places of power on the planet to ignite your greater flame of power within you to do what you came here to do. And yeah, I'll be doing events such as this conference at, again, full disclosure now conference, yeah, at St. Pete's Beach. Go to fulldisclosuremovement.org to get your tickets. See you guys there. And thank you guys for coming. Leave in the comments if you like our guests and you'd like to have them on again, and any questions for that later. And please share this video as far as it can go, because the more we see watching this, the more we'll be inspired to do more work. And like and subscribe, as well as, do you have a YouTube?
I don't have a YouTube, no. I mean, I do, but I have like 1 or 2 videos on it. It's not.
Okay. Yeah, see if you can find his YouTube, and then yeah, yeah, spark this out and let us know if you want us to have him on again. Thank you all for coming. Love you. See you.